I used to think my family loved me. I was wrong. For 15 years, I sent £5,000 every single month to my parents in Bristol to pay their mortgage, my sister Emily's credit cards, and my father's debts. I sacrificed holidays, relationships, and my own future. Because that's what good daughters do, right? Then the wedding invitation arrived. My name was crossed out, literally scratched off the guest list, as if I were a stranger. When I called my mum, she couldn't even look me in the eye over FaceTime. When I confronted my father, Richard Barr, he said 5 words that shattered my world. This wedding is for real family only, real family. I had been paying their bills for over a decade, and I wasn't real family. But here's what they didn't know. I had just found out something. Something about my father. Something about a trust fund in my name. Something about a woman named Rebecca. My real mother who died under very suspicious circumstances 35 years ago. And the more I dug, the more I realized my father wasn't just using me. He was erasing me, replacing me, planning to take everything I had ever worked for and give it to someone else. So I made a decision. I stopped sending the money. I hired a lawyer, and I showed up at that wedding anyway, with proof that would destroy everything my father had built on lies. What happened next made national news. Because when you take everything from someone who has been silent for 37 years, you had better make sure they don't have receipts. And I had all the receipts. This is the true story of how I took my life back and made my family face every single lie they ever told. Watch until the end. You will not believe what my father did, or how I made him pay for it all. My name is Lucy Barr. I'm 37 years old, and for the last 15 years I've been working as a financial consultant in London, helping wealthy clients protect and grow their assets. The irony is not lost on me. I'm brilliant at managing other people's finances. Yet I have been financially overextending myself to support my own family since I was 22. I used to think Lucy was an angel. A voice whispers in my memory. Words spoken by someone I haven't met yet in a conversation that hasn't happened yet, until I discovered the truth about what her family did to her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Allow me to take you back 3 months ago, when my carefully constructed world of duty and sacrifice began to crumble. It was a Tuesday morning in late August. London's summer haze hung low over the city as I sat at my desk on the 14th floor of the Morrison Financial Building, reviewing quarterly reports for a tech executive who had just sold his startup for £20 million. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I hadn't noticed. This was how I lived, so focused on the financial security of others that I forgot to attend to my own basic needs. My assistant, Karen, knocked softly on the door before entering. She'd been with me for 3 years and knew my habits so well that she often brought me a fresh cup of coffee without me having to ask. But this time, she was carrying something different. A cream-coloured envelope with elegant calligraphy on the front. My name, Lucy Barr, written in a flowing script that conveyed celebration and joy. "This just arrived by courier," Karen said, placing it on my desk with a smile. "Looks fancy. Is someone getting married?" My heart leapt. Emily. My little sister was finally marrying Jake, her boyfriend of 4 years. We'd talked about this day since she was a little girl playing bride with bedsheets and my mum's old curtains. I'd always pictured myself helping her pick out flowers, addressing the invitations together, maybe even being her maid of honor. I opened the envelope carefully, not wanting to tear the beautiful paper. Inside was a thick card with gold foil accents. "Emily Rose Barr and Jacob Michael Thorne request the honor of your presence at their marriage." The date was set for October 15th, just 6 weeks away. My eyes scanned down to the section dedicated to family, looking for my name, for my role in this celebration. That's when I saw it. My name was there, but it had been struck through. Not delicately, not accidentally, but with deliberate black ink, thick lines, scoring through Lucy Barr, as if someone wanted to make absolutely sure I understood that I was being erased. The word family remained, but I had been removed from beneath it. I stared at that crossed-out name for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only seconds. My hand started to shake, making the card vibrate with it. Karen noticed. "Is everything all right?" she asked. I couldn't answer. I couldn't speak because in that moment, 15 years of monthly bank transfers flashed through my mind like a slideshow. £5,000 every single month. Never late, never questioned. Money that paid the mortgage on my parents' house in Bristol. Money that covered the payments on my father's Range Rover, which he drove around town, telling everyone was a gift. He bought himself after years of hard work. Money that funded my sister Emily's lifestyle. Her rent, her shopping sprees, her nights out with friends, while she worked a part-time job at a boutique that barely paid for her daily coffee. I had been doing it since I was 22, fresh out of university with my first real job. My father, Richard Barr, had sat me down in his study, the study in the house I was now paying for, and explained that family looks after family. He'd lost his business, made some bad investments, trusted the wrong people. He needed help to get back on his feet just temporarily, just until things turned around. 15 years later, things had not turned around. The temporary help had become a permanent obligation, and I accepted it. Because that's what good daughters do, right? That's what I told myself every time I transferred money that could have gone towards a deposit on my own flat, towards that trip to Italy I'd dreamed of since university, towards the financial security I preached to my clients, but never practiced for myself. I lived in a studio flat in a decent but unremarkable neighborhood. My furniture was from IKEA. I drove a 10-year-old Vauxhall Corsa. My colleagues often invited me to expensive dinners or weekend trips to wine country, but I always declined. They thought I was shy, dedicated to my work. They didn't know I was supporting 3 other people on my salary. My mum, Margaret, never called to ask how I was. She only called when the money was late, which it never was, or when there was a new expense. "Lucy, darling, your father's Range Rover needs new tyres. Lucy, darling, Emily needs a bit of help with a bridesmaid's dress for her friend's wedding." Always framed as gentle requests, but we both knew they were demands. And Emily, my sister, 8 years younger than me, had grown up watching me work multiple jobs through university while she got a car for her 16th birthday. Emily, who posted Instagram photos of expensive brunches while I ate a packed lunch at my desk. Emily, who never once said thank you for the money that funded her life, because she genuinely seemed to believe it was her birthright to receive and my duty to give. I picked up my phone with a shaking hand and called my mum. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice hesitant, almost guilty. "Lucy, hi darling, I was just about to call you." "Mum, I got Emily's invitation," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My name is crossed out. What's going on?" Silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words. "Mum, it's complicated, darling. It's a seating arrangements thing. You know what wedding planning is like. So many details to manage. Seating arrangements. You crossed my name out under the family section. Your father thought—" She trailed off. I heard his voice in the background, firm and authoritative, though I couldn't make out the words. "I have to go, Lucy. Your father needs me." "Mum, wait." The line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone at the crossed-out invitation at the financial reports on my screen for a man who had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt something other than dutiful acceptance. I felt anger. I called my father directly. He answered immediately, his voice booming with false cheer. Lucy, to what do I owe the honor? Dad. What is going on with Emily's wedding? Why is my name crossed out? The cheer evaporated instantly. His voice turned cold, flat, matter-of-fact. This wedding is for real family only. 5 words. That's all it took to shatter everything I believed about my place in the Barr family. Real family. As if 15 years of sacrifice, of putting their needs before mine, of being their financial lifeline, meant nothing. As if I were something less than real. I stared at my phone screen, my father's words still echoing in my ears. Real family. The phrase felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I sat frozen at my desk for several minutes before my hands finally stopped shaking enough to dial my mother's number again. This time she answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for me to call back. Lucy, please, now is not a good time. Her voice was almost a whisper, strained and nervous. Mum, I need you to explain what Dad meant by real family. I have been supporting this family for 15 years. What does that mean? It's just a seating thing, darling. You know how complicated wedding planning can be. There are so many people to accommodate. The venue has limited space, and Emily is so stressed about the guest list. The words tumbled out as if rehearsed. Mum, stop. Just stop. My name was scratched off the list. That's not about seating arrangements. That's about not being wanted there. There was a long pause. I could hear her shallow, uneven breathing. You know how your father is about these things. He gets very particular ideas about how things should be. And once he's made up his mind, there's no changing it. I tried to talk to him. I swear I did. But it's just easier to go along with him than to fight him. Lucy, it's not fair. You don't understand how difficult things have been here. Your father has been under a tremendous amount of stress, and Emily's wedding is already causing so much tension, and you questioning every little thing just makes him… She stopped abruptly. In the background, I heard my father's voice, sharp and angry. Just the tone of it was enough to make my chest tighten, an old familiar fear. I have to go, my mother said quickly. Your father is calling me. Mum, please just tell me the truth. Why don't they want me at the wedding? But she had already hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like a funeral dirge. I sat there in my office, surrounded by the financial portfolios and investment strategies of people who valued my expertise and felt more worthless than I ever had in my life. Karen peeked in to ask if I wanted lunch, took one look at my face, and quietly closed the door. The hours ticked by. I went through my afternoon meetings on autopilot, my mind replaying the conversation with my father over and over again. Real family. What did that make me? Fake. Family, temporary family. A convenient cash machine that had finally outlived its usefulness. At 6 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text message. Emily. My heart squeezed with a desperate hope that maybe she had intervened. Maybe she had cleared up this misunderstanding. Maybe my little sister still loved me enough to want me there on the most important day of her life. The message was short. It's for close family only. Hope you understand. And then, as if to soften the blow, or perhaps to twist the knife, a red heart emoji. I read it 3 times, each reading feeling like an individual punch. Close family only. The heart emoji seemed obscene, a mockery of genuine affection. No explanation, no apology, just a casual dismissal as if she were declining an invitation to lunch, rather than cutting me out of a major family event. My hands moved on their own, opening Instagram. Emily's profile was public, a curated highlight reel of a life funded by my bank account. The most recent post showed her holding up fabric swatches with the caption, "Can't wait to celebrate with the people who actually matter. 6 more weeks." The emphasis on actually felt intentional, deliberate. I kept scrolling, looking for something, though I didn't know what. That's when I saw her. In a photo from 2 months ago, Emily had her arm around a young woman I had never seen before. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with dark hair and Richard's distinctive angular jawline. The caption read, "Finally have someone who gets me," followed by a heart emoji and the hashtag sisterly love. I held my breath. Sisterly love. But I was Emily's only sister, wasn't I? I clicked on the tagged profile. Sophia Barr, 25, Bristol. The account was public, and I fell down a rabbit hole of photos. Sophia at coffee shops with Emily. Sophia at family dinners at my parents' house, sitting in what used to be my chair. Sophia laughing with my father, his hand on her shoulder, in a gesture of paternal affection I couldn't remember him ever showing me. In one photo from a month ago, Sophia was on my parents' front porch with a moving box. Emily stood beside her, the caption reading, "Helping my real sister move in. Hashtag family first, hashtag always." This stranger had moved into the house I paid for. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I went to my father's Facebook page, something I rarely checked because his posts always left me feeling hollow. The most recent update was from 3 days ago. It was a picture of the house, the beautiful craftsman-style home, with the wraparound porch and the garden my mother tended. Standing on that porch was Emily, beaming in the golden hour light, my father's arm around her shoulders. The caption read, "Blessed to be able to give this gift for my little girl's new beginning. A father's greatest joy is seeing his daughter start her married life in a home filled with love. Grateful I could provide this foundation for her." The comments section was filled with praise. "You're such a wonderful father, Richard. Emily is so lucky to have you. What an amazing gift. This is what family is all about." I felt physically sick. That house, that beautiful house he was taking credit for, I had bought it 3 years ago. I'd used every penny of my savings, £30,000 I had scraped together over years of careful financial planning as the deposit. I'd been paying the mortgage ever since £1,500 a month, on top of the £3,500 I sent for their other expenses. I had signed the deed and put it in their names because my father said it would help with their tax situation. Because family helps family. Because that's what good daughters do. And now he was framing it as a gift to Emily. My sacrifice had been rebranded as his generosity. I had been completely erased from the narrative of my own life. I picked up my phone one more time and called my father. He answered with barely concealed irritation. "What is it, Lucy? I'm busy." "The house. The one you're giving to Emily. I paid for that house. You helped. And we're grateful. But that doesn't give you the right to interfere in family decisions. I paid the deposit. I pay the mortgage every single month. How is that helping?" His voice turned to ice, every word sharp and precise. "You did your part, Lucy. Now let the real family celebrate." Then he hung up on me too. I left the office early that day, something I never did. Karen looked surprised when I grabbed my coat at 4:30, but she didn't ask questions. Maybe she saw something broken in my face that made words unnecessary. I drove home on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. When I finally pulled into the car park of my modest block of flats, I couldn't bring myself to go inside. Instead, I just sat there in my 10-year-old Vauxhall Corsa, staring at nothing, feeling everything. That's when the memory surfaced unbidden and brutal in its clarity. I was 12, playing in the waves at Fistral Beach. It was meant to be a perfect summer day, the kind of family holiday that gets enshrined in photo albums and remembered for years. My brother Daniel, fearless and 16, was teaching me how to body surf. Emily was just 4, building sandcastles with Mum, while Dad read the paper under an umbrella, occasionally looking up to make sure we hadn't drifted too far. I didn't see the riptide coming. One minute I was laughing, cresting over the waves. The next I was being pulled out to seawater, filling my mouth and nose as I tried to scream. Daniel came after me immediately. I remember his hand grabbing my wrist. I remember him yelling at me to stop fighting, to let him pull me in. But I panicked. I clawed at him, climbed on top of him in my terror, pushed him under in my desperate need for air. The lifeguards finally reached us. They pulled me out of the water first. I was spluttering and crying and alive. When they brought Daniel to shore 2 minutes later, he wasn't breathing. They tried CPR for 20 minutes while I sat wrapped in a towel, shivering, watching my brother's still body on the sand. My mother was screaming, Emily was crying, and my father just stood there, his face unreadable, looking from Daniel to me and back to Daniel. My brother died because he tried to save me. That was the official version, the one people told at the funeral, the one that was supposed to make his death noble and meaningful. But my father's version was different. In the days and weeks and years that followed, Richard Barr made sure I understood the real story. Daniel died because of me. Because I panicked and because I wasn't strong enough. Because I was the child who should have died that day, not him. 2 months after the funeral, my father sat me down in his study. I was still 12, still having nightmares, still flinching every time I heard the ocean. He looked at me with eyes that held no warmth, no comfort, only a cold calculation. Daniel was going to take over my business one day, he said. He was going to be someone. You're going to have to make up for what was lost, Lucy. Do you understand? You're going to have to work twice as hard, be twice as good, because you're living the life that should have been his. And I believed him. God help me. I believed him. By 13, I had a paper round. By 14, I was babysitting every weekend. By 15, I was working at a supermarket after school, and every payslip I earned went into an envelope that I handed to my father. For the family, he'd say, taking my crumpled notes without a thank you. Meanwhile, Emily got dance lessons and new clothes and a sweet 16 party that cost more than I earned in a year. I put myself through a local college because a proper university was out of the question if I was to live at home and keep contributing to the household. I watched Emily get a brand new car for her 16th birthday. I watched her drive off to the university I dreamed of attending, all expenses paid by our parents. By then, my father's business had failed, and somehow that became my responsibility too. 25 years of penance for the crime of surviving. Sitting in my car, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since Daniel's death, I didn't feel the crushing guilt that had weighed on every decision I'd ever made. Instead, I felt a strange, chilling calm settle over me like cold water. The hollow space where love and hope used to be was suddenly shockingly clear. They never loved me. They used me. There was a difference, and I had been too steeped in guilt and obligation to see it. I thought about the promotion I'd turned down last year, because it would have required a move to New York, and my father had said the family needed me to stay close, needed the money to keep coming in steadily. I thought about the man I'd dated 2 years ago, kind and patient, who finally left me because I'd cancelled our weekend away 3 times to deal with family emergencies that always required immediate bank transfers. I thought about my colleague Jennifer's holiday photos from Greece she'd posted last week, and how I'd scrolled past them, feeling only a faint pang of something I couldn't even name as envy, because I'd conditioned myself not to want things. They never intended to pay me back, not emotionally, not financially, not ever. I was a resource to be exploited, not a daughter to be loved. I picked up my phone and opened my banking app. My hands were steady now, no longer shaking. I moved through the menus with deliberate precision past my current account balance, which was always lower than it should be, and my near-empty savings account to the standing orders section. There it was. The mortgage payment scheduled to go out in 3 days. £1,500 that would leave my account and disappear into a house that bore my father's name and my sister's future. My finger hovered over the button. Cancel all future payments. Before I could press it, my phone buzzed with a text. Mum. The preview showed the first line. Lucy, please don't do anything rash. I opened it. Lucy. Please don't do anything rash. I know you're hurt, but there are things you don't understand. Your father is hiding something much bigger than this wedding. Please call me when he's not home. I stared at the message for exactly 5 seconds before it vanished from my screen. She had unsent it likely in a panic that Richard would see it and ask questions she couldn't answer. But I had already taken a screenshot. Whatever she meant, whatever my father was hiding, it didn't matter anymore. The warning should have made me pause. It should have made me curious, cautious, willing to wait and gather more information. Instead, it did the opposite. It confirmed what I already knew. This family had been lying to me for years, and my mother had been complicit in it with her silence. I pressed confirm cancellation. The screen refreshed. All standing orders to Richard and Margaret Barr have been cancelled. I sat in my car watching the London drizzle begin to streak my windscreen, and I felt something I had never felt before in my entire 37 years. Freedom. The next morning I walked into my manager's office and asked for something I had never asked for in 15 years at Morrison Financial Time Off. Not just a long weekend, but a full week. My manager David looked at me with genuine concern and approved it immediately, no questions asked. Maybe he'd noticed the dark circles under my eyes, or maybe Karen had said something. Either way, within 2 hours, I had packed a single bag, filled up my car, and started driving southwest with no destination in mind. I ended up in St. Ives, Cornwall, a small coastal town I'd seen in a travel magazine someone had left in the office break room 6 months ago. I'd torn out the page and kept it in my desk drawer, looking at it sometimes during lunch, wondering what it would be like to be the kind of person who takes spontaneous trips to picturesque seaside villages. And there I was, pulling up to a tiny rental cottage I'd found online at 2 a.m., too exhausted to feel anything but a numb relief. For the first time in years, I turned off all notifications on my phone, except for phone calls. No texts, no emails, no social media alerts. The silence was both terrifying and exhilarating. The first morning I woke up at 11 a.m. 11 a.m. I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept past 7. And the guilt that immediately washed over me was almost enough to make me grab my phone and check if anyone needed anything. But I forced myself to sit with the discomfort, to let it wash over me without acting on it. The guilt eventually receded, replaced by something else, something that felt almost like peace. I spent my days walking on deserted September beaches. The tourist season was over, leaving only locals and the occasional lone wanderer like me. I'd brought 3 novels I'd bought over the years, but never read, always telling myself I'd get to them when things calmed down. Things never calmed down because I never let them. Now I sat on driftwood logs and read for entire chapters, without looking at my watch, without calculating how much time I was wasting, without the constant background anxiety that someone somewhere needed me to solve a problem. On my 3rd morning, I found a little cafe 2 blocks from my cottage. The kind of place with mismatched chairs, homemade muffins in a glass case, and a menu handwritten on a chalkboard in perfect script. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes was behind the counter. Her name tag said, Ruth. "You're not from around here," she said as she poured my coffee. It wasn't a question. "London. Just visiting for a week. By myself." "I see. Not being nosy, just observing. You work in a small-town cafe long enough you learn to read people." She nodded and slid a blueberry muffin across the counter. "On the house. You look like you could use something sweet." I came back every morning after that, and by the fourth day, Ruth started sitting with me during the slow morning hours. She didn't ask probing questions, didn't try to fix my problems. She just talked about her own life, her garden, her late husband, the rhythm of life in a place where the ocean was both a neighbor and a calendar. On the fifth morning, she asked about my family, not nosily, just conversationally, the way you'd ask about the weather. I surprised myself by telling her the truth. "I don't think I have one anymore." Ruth didn't show shock or pity, not in that performative way people often do. She just nodded slowly, stirring honey into her tea. "Family isn't who drains you dry, darling. It's who helps you heal." The simplicity of it made my throat tighten. I had spent 25 years trying to be good enough, trying to earn love through sacrifice, believing that if I just gave enough, I would eventually be deemed worthy of keeping. But Ruth's words lanced a wound inside me. Maybe the tragedy wasn't that I was alone, but that I had ever let myself be used. While I was finding unexpected peace in Cornwall, my father was drowning in his own hubris in Bristol, though he didn't know it yet. I know this now because Margaret told me later in one of our last conversations what those weeks looked like from inside the house I had paid for. Richard continued to play the part of the successful patriarch without missing a beat. He told the neighbors over the fence how he was handling all the wedding expenses and how proud he was to be giving Emily such a beautiful start to her married life. He drove to the dealership and put down a deposit on a new Range Rover, a gleaming black one, with all the extras charging the £5,000 to a credit card without a second thought. In his mind, my next transfer would arrive in a few days and cover it all easily. It always had before. When Margaret tried to mention that she hadn't seen a recent deposit from me, Richard waved her off with irritation. "She's just being dramatic," he said, playing the victim because we hurt her feelings. "She'll come crawling back and apologize in a week. She always does. Lucy doesn't know how to function without us needing her." His certainty was absolute, built on 15 years of conditioning me to believe my worth was measured by my utility. That week, he even made a sanctimonious Facebook post about the importance of family sacrifice and how the younger generation needed to understand that true love meant putting others first. Dozens of people commented with praise, a few tagged their own children. Richard basked in the validation, completely oblivious to the cliff he was walking towards. Emily was no better. She went dress shopping with Sophia, the mystery sister, whose existence I still didn't fully understand, and bought a dress that cost £4,000. She booked a honeymoon package 2 weeks at an all-inclusive resort, charging the £8,000 deposit to a credit card that had my name on it as an authorized user. Something I had agreed to years ago when she claimed it was for emergencies only. For Emily, everything was always an emergency, and someone else's money was always the solution. But Margaret knew something they didn't. While Richard was out one afternoon, probably at the pub, telling his mates about the generous wedding gift he'd given Emily, Margaret did something she had never done in 35 years of marriage. She took her old mobile phone, the one she kept charged in her bedside drawer as a backup, and hid it in the kitchen pantry behind the cereal boxes. Then she pressed record. When Richard came home and started talking on the phone, Margaret's hands were shaking so badly she had to sit down. But she let the phone record, capturing every word of Richard's conversation. His voice was clear, confident, and free from any weight of conscience. "As soon as the wedding is over, we won't need Lucy anymore. I've already put the house in Emily's name, and that trust fund Lucy doesn't know about. I'll have access to it in 3 years when she turns 40. She won't see a penny. Margaret stopped the recording and saved the file with trembling fingers. She didn't know what she would do with it. She didn't know if she'd ever have the courage to use it. But for the first time in decades, the truth existed somewhere outside of her terrified silence. 3 days later, a recorded delivery letter arrived from the bank. Margaret signed for it with a smile for the postman, then opened it alone in the kitchen. Her hands went cold as she read the first line. Notice of foreclosure proceedings for non-payment. You have 30 days to respond. On my 6th night in Cornwall, I couldn't sleep. The cottage bedroom was perfectly silent, the kind of quiet I had been craving for years, but my mind refused to settle. I couldn't stop thinking about that girl from Emily's photos, the stranger with my sister's arm around her shoulder. The caption that haunted me, "Finally have someone who gets me." The finally implied that I had never been enough, that my absence was a relief rather than a loss. At 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and opened my laptop. The blue glow of the screen felt harsh in the darkness as I navigated back to Emily's Instagram, scrolling through the posts I had already memorized. There she was again, that dark-haired girl with the familiar sharp jaw, tagged in photo after photo. I clicked on her profile. Sophia Barr, 25, Bristol. The profile was public, and I found myself staring into a life from which I had been deliberately excluded. There were dozens of pictures spanning the last 2 years. Sophia and Richard at a steakhouse, his hand on her shoulder, both of them laughing at something just out of frame. Sophia and Emily on a hiking trail, matching sunglasses and genuine smiles. Sophia sitting at what I recognized as my parents' dining table, a birthday cake in front of her with lit candles, Margaret visible in the background. My parents had thrown her a birthday party. When was the last time they had remembered mine? I couldn't remember. I kept scrolling each picture like a small stab. A photo from 6 months ago showed Richard with his arms around both Emily and Sophia, the three of them dressed up for what looked like a fancy dinner. The caption read, "My girls," not "my daughters" or "family dinner," just "my girls," possessive and proud. The smile on Richard's face in that photo was genuine in a way I had never seen directed at me. He looked happy, fulfilled, complete. The comments were filled with heart emojis and exclamation marks. Friends saying how lucky they were to have such an amazing father. Strangers commenting on what a beautiful family they were. No one asking about the missing daughter because no one even knew I existed anymore. I had been erased so completely that my absence didn't even leave a gap. I scrolled further down my finger, moving compulsively across the screen, searching for answers to questions I didn't know how to ask. Then I found it a post from exactly 2 years ago, the oldest picture of Sophia with Richard. She was standing outside what looked like a coffee shop, holding up a 23, and me, result, on her phone. The caption sent a chill down my spine. After 25 years of searching, I finally found my father through 23andMe. Blood doesn't lie. Hashtag family reunion. Hashtag daddy's girl. The comments section exploded with congratulations and celebration. Friends wrote about how amazing it was that she'd found him, how 23, and me was a miracle, how happy she must be. Richard had commented too. Best day of my life. Welcome home, my love. My mind started doing maths I didn't want to do. Sophia was 25. I was 37. That meant she was born 12 years after me, which would have made me 12 when she was conceived. But the implications went further than that. If she had been searching for Richard for 25 years, it meant she had grown up not knowing who her father was. It meant Richard had abandoned her mother while she was pregnant, or shortly after Sophia was born. It meant my father was having an affair while he was married to Margaret, while he was raising me, while our family was supposedly a unit. I clicked on Sophia's About section with shaking hands. Hometown Bristol, relationship status single. And there under family daughter of Richard Barr and Carla Morrison. Carla Morrison. The name was completely unfamiliar, sparking no memory or recognition. I opened a new browser tab and searched for her, adding Bristol to narrow the results. Several profiles came up, but one of them was for a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and a tired smile, listed as a nurse at Bristol Royal Infirmary. I stared at her picture, trying to find something in her face that would explain why my father had chosen her. Why he had created an entire second family I never knew existed. I went back to Emily's Instagram, purposeful now, no longer just hurting. I found the post I had seen before, the one from 3 months ago, that had felt like a targeted attack. Emily's arm around Sophia, the two of them laughing, the caption reading, "Some people are in your life by blood, some are by choice. So grateful I finally have a real sister who understands what loyalty and family values are all about." She'd tagged Sophia and added a pink heart emoji. The comments section delivered another crushing blow. Richard had written, "So proud of my girls for supporting each other. This is what a real family looks like." Real family. There was that phrase again, the one that had become a weapon. I'd heard it from Richard on the phone when he cut me out of the wedding. I'd seen it in Emily's dismissive text. And now here it was again, was public and permanent, declaring that whatever Sophia and Emily had together was authentic in a way my relationship with them never was. I understood then with devastating clarity what had happened. Richard hadn't just found a long-lost daughter. He had found a replacement for me, someone younger, more grateful without the baggage of Daniel's death, and 25 years of guilt-driven obligation. Sophia represented a fresh start, a daughter he could mold without the weight of his past failures. And Emily, ever eager to align herself with whoever held the power in our family, had embraced this new sister with enthusiasm. Perhaps relieved to finally have a sibling who wasn't a walking reminder of everything that was wrong with our family dynamic. But why now? Why bring Sophia into the family 2 years ago, and why push me out completely just 3 months ago? What had changed? What was Richard planning that required my complete absence? I looked up Carla Morrison's address, cross-referencing the nurse from the BRI with public records. It took 20 minutes, but I found a small house in a modest Bristol neighbourhood about 20 minutes south of my parents' home. The Google Street View image showed a humble, well-kept house, clearly belonging to someone who worked for a living, not someone who was benefiting from my monthly transfers. I leaned back and stared at my laptop screen at the address glowing in the search bar. The peace and healing I had found in Cornwall suddenly felt fragile, like a brief intermission before the real storm. A part of me wanted to close the laptop, go back to bed, pretend I had never found Sophia's profile or heard of Carla Morrison. I could finish my week here, drive back to London and build a new life that had nothing to do with any of them. But I knew I couldn't. Not anymore. Because this wasn't just about being cut out of a wedding or having my financial support taken for granted. This was about my father systematically replacing me with a newer model, erasing me from the family narrative while I was still alive to watch it happen. And I needed to know why. I opened a new tab and booked a flight back to Bristol for the following morning. It was time to meet the woman who gave my father his real daughter. While I was booking my flight back to Bristol, 230 miles south, in the house I had been paying for Margaret, was opening a piece of registered mail that would shatter my father's carefully constructed illusion. Her hands trembled as she signed for the envelope, smiling automatically at the postman before closing the door and staring at the return address. First National Bank. Her stomach clenched. She told me all of this later during one of our last conversations. Her voice thick with regret as she described that moment, How she stood in the hallway, the heavy envelope in her hands, knowing before she even opened it that something terrible was coming. How she carried it to the kitchen table and sat down, before carefully tearing the seal, as if the simple act of sitting could somehow soften the blow. The letter was blunt and bureaucratic in its cruelty. Notice of foreclosure proceedings for non-payment. Your mortgage account is currently £15,000 in arrears. You have 30 days to bring the account current or foreclosure proceedings will be initiated. Please contact our office immediately to discuss payment options. £15,000, 3 months of missed payments. It had been 3 months since I'd cancelled the standing orders, and no one had noticed until the bank sent this final warning. Margaret carried the letter into Richard's study, where he was scrolling through Facebook, probably reading comments on his latest post about family values. She placed the notice on his desk without a word, watching his expression as he read it. She expected concern, maybe fear, maybe even a flicker of recognition that his financial house of cards was collapsing. Instead, his face flushed with rage. "Why didn't you tell me the payments weren't going through?" he yelled, slamming his hand on the desk so hard his coffee cup jumped. "You're supposed to be monitoring these things, Margaret. That's your job." "I didn't know," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I thought Lucy was still—" "It's a bank error," Richard interrupted, his voice firm and certain. "They mess up automatic payments all the time. I'll call them tomorrow and sort it out." "Richard, it says we're 3 months behind. That's not an error." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "You are not to contact Lucy. Do you understand me? Not a word of this to her. But she's the one who's been paying—" "She's playing a game, Margaret." Richard's fist hit the desk again. "Trying to manipulate us, make us beg. She'll come crawling back and apologize in a week. She always does. Lucy doesn't know how to function without us needing her. It's pathetic, really." Margaret stared at her husband, seeing him clearly, perhaps for the first time in decades. His confidence was absolute, unshakable, built on 35 years of successfully bending a grieving child to his will. He genuinely believed that Lucy's silence was a temporary tantrum, that she would break before he did, that his control was permanent and unquestionable. "You handle this quietly," Richard said, turning back to his computer. "I have to focus on the wedding plans. Emily needs me. My real family needs me." Margaret left his study and went to the kitchen, where she sat alone at the table and stared at her phone. She had Lucy's number on the screen, her thumb hovering over the call button, but she couldn't bring herself to press it. What would she even say? "Please come back and let us destroy you some more. We're sorry we erased you from your sister's wedding, but we still need your money." The kitchen door burst open and Emily stormed in, her face blotchy and red from crying. "Mum, my credit card was declined. The honeymoon deposit bounced. The resort cancelled our booking." Margaret felt something inside her crack a little more. "Emily, darling, we're having some temporary financial trouble." "Where is Lucy?" Emily shrieked. "Why isn't she answering her phone?" "Make her fix this." "I don't think Lucy is going to fix this." "What do you mean she's not going to fix it?" "It's my wedding. How could you let this happen? You're both useless." Emily grabbed her phone and started dialing Lucy's number, her fingers jabbing furiously at the screen. Margaret watched her youngest daughter place call after call, each one going to voicemail, each rejection making Emily angrier instead of more reflective. By the 17th call, Emily was leaving voicemails that made Margaret cringe. "You are so selfish, Lucy. This is my wedding, my special day. How could you do this to me? After everything we've done for you, after we raised you and gave you a home, this is how you repay us. You are ruining this family. Call me back right now." There was no awareness in Emily's voice, no acknowledgement that she was the one who had cut Lucy out of that very wedding. No understanding that Lucy was a person with feelings and limits, not an infinite resource to be tapped. Emily had never learned to see her older sister as anything other than a solution to her problems, a funding source for her lifestyle, a functionary who existed to make Emily's life easier. Margaret finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Emily, you told her she wasn't real family. You crossed her name off the wedding invitation. Emily whirled on her mother, her eyes blazing. So what? That doesn't mean she gets to stop paying for things. That's not how it works. How does it work, Emily? She owes us. She has always owed us. It's her responsibility to take care of this family. Margaret looked at her 29-year-old daughter still operating with the emotional reasoning of a spoiled child and felt the full crushing weight of her own failures as a mother. She had allowed this. She had watched Richard turn Lucy into a servant and Emily into a parasite, and said nothing because speaking up required a courage she didn't possess. After Emily stormed out, presumably to try calling Lucy again, Margaret sat alone in the kitchen that Lucy's money had renovated 2 years prior. The granite worktops, the new appliances, the custom cabinets, all paid for by a daughter they had just declared wasn't real family. For the first time in decades, Margaret allowed herself to feel something other than fear of Richard's anger. She felt shame, a deep, burning shame that made her hands tremble and her chest ache. She had watched her husband exploit Lucy for 25 years. She had heard him blame a 12-year-old for her brother's death and then demand a lifetime of penance for surviving. She had stood by silently as he turned grief into servitude, as he built an empire of obligation on the grave of one child and the guilt of another. Margaret took out her phone. The old backup mobile she kept hidden in her bedside drawer, and checked the recording one more time. Richard's voice, clear and damning. As soon as the wedding is over, we won't need Lucy anymore. I've already put the house in Emily's name. And that trust fund Lucy doesn't even know about. It'll be available to me in 3 years when she turns 40. She won't see a penny. She still didn't know what she would do with it. She still didn't know if she would ever have the courage to use it. But it existed, and that felt important somehow. That night, after Richard came home from wherever he'd been, Margaret noticed something missing from her jewelry box. The pearl necklace Lucy had given her 3 Christmases ago, bought with money Lucy had saved by taking on extra clients during tax season. It was the only piece of jewelry Margaret truly loved, the one gift that had felt personal instead of obligatory. She found Richard in his study counting cash. "Where is my necklace?" she asked. He didn't look up. "I pawned it. £800. Needed it to cover some expenses. This is Lucy's fault. So consider this a partial payment for all the trouble she's causing." He finally looked at her, his eyes cold. "She'll be back, Margaret. And when she comes back, she'll owe us an apology." I landed in Bristol on a grey Thursday morning and drove straight to the address I had found for Carla Morrison. The neighbourhood was modest, but neat rows of semi-detached houses with small front gardens and practical cars in the driveways. A real working-class, lives in the real world kind of place. I parked across the street and sat in my rental car for 10 minutes, trying to decide what I would say to the woman who had given my father a daughter he actually seemed to love. When I finally knocked on her door, it was opened by a woman in light blue nurse's scrubs. Her grey-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked tired the way you get after decades of working shifts and raising a child on your own. When I said, "I'm Lucy Barr, Richard Barr's daughter," all the colour drained from her face. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You'd better come in." Her living room was small and cosy, filled with pictures of Sophia at various ages. Sophia at 7 with a gap-toothed grin. Sophia in a secondary school graduation gown. Sophia blowing out birthday candles. A lifetime of moments documented on walls my father had never seen until 2 years ago. Carla gestured for me to sit on a worn sofa, while she remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. "What do you want?" Her voice was sharp, protective. "Sophia finally has her father in her life. She's happy for the first time in years, if you're here to ruin that for her." "I'm here because I need to understand what's happening." I cut in, keeping my voice calm. 3 months ago, my father told me I wasn't real family. Last week, I found out I have a sister I never knew existed. So I'm asking you straight up, how long were you involved with my father? Carla's defensive posture crumbled. She sank heavily into a chair opposite me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. 37 years ago, she said finally. We worked together at his company. He told me his marriage was falling apart, that he and Margaret were only staying together for appearances. I believed him because I wanted to, because I was 23 and naive, and thought an older, charming man with a troubled marriage was romantic instead of what it actually was. 37 years. I was 37. The maths hit me like a punch to the gut. Then I got pregnant. Carla continued, her voice thick with old pain. And suddenly his marriage wasn't ending anymore. Suddenly he had responsibilities to his family. He gave me £2,000 and told me to take care of it, quietly. When I told him I was keeping the baby, he vanished. Changed his phone number, had his secretary tell me he'd moved for work. I raised Sophia on my own, on a nurse's salary, while he was playing the devoted husband and father to you. Did he know? I asked. That you kept her. I sent him a letter when she was born. No response. I tried calling his office a few times over the years when money was really tight, thinking maybe he would help. Nothing. To Richard Barr, Sophia didn't exist until 2 years ago. What changed? Carla got up and walked to a bookshelf, picking up a framed photo. In it, Sophia was holding her phone with the 23andMe app visible on the screen. Sophia got curious about her genetic heritage. I'd never told her who her father was because what was the point? But she did one of those DNA tests, and it came back as a match to Richard. He'd done one for fun, apparently. Sophia sent him a message through the app, and he responded within hours. Carla's laugh was bitter. To my shock, he embraced her immediately, started calling wanting to meet for coffee, saying he'd made terrible mistakes and wanted to make amends. He cried when he saw her for the first time, said he'd thought about her every day for 25 years. It was very convincing. But you didn't believe him. I wanted to. For Sophia's sake, I wanted to believe he had changed. He started visiting regularly, taking her out for nice dinners, introducing her to Emily. He said he wanted to fix the past, to be the father he should have been. But something felt off about how quickly he folded her into his life, and he never mentioned having another daughter. When I finally asked about his family, he said, "My older daughter is independent. She doesn't need a family the way Sophia does." The words stung even second-hand. Independent. Code for disposable. Code. Did my father ever mention money? I asked, even though I already knew the answer would hurt. Carla hesitated, then nodded slowly. About 6 months ago, things got strange. Richard started talking to Sophia about inheritance and estate planning. He said he wanted to make things right, that he was leaving everything to her and Emily. He kept saying they were his real legacy. Did he ever mention my name? Not really, just an L sometimes, always dismissively. Carla picked up her phone and started scrolling. Sophia showed me some of their texts. She thought it was sweet that he was including her in his family planning. I thought it was weird. Here. She handed me the phone. The message was from Richard to Sophia, dated 4 months ago. "Once we're done with Elle, the house and the trust fund will be yours. You are my fresh start, my love." I read it 3 times, each word sinking in like poison. Once we're done with Elle. Not once things are sorted out. Not once arrangements are made. done with me, as if I were a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. What trust fund? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know. Sophia didn't know either. She just assumed he meant the general family assets. I handed her phone back, my hands trembling. Did he ever explain what he meant by being done with me? No. And honestly, I didn't push it because I didn't want to know. I was just happy Sophia had a father. Carla's voice broke. I'm so sorry. I didn't know he had another daughter he was systematically discarding. I didn't know you existed, or that he was using Sophia as your replacement. If I had known, what would you have done? Told him no. I finished for her. He's good at making people do what he wants. We sat in silence for a moment. Two women who had been used by the same man in different ways. Carla had been discarded when she became inconvenient. I was being discarded now that I had served my purpose. Sophia was the new shiny toy, useful for whatever scheme Richard was architecting. Does Sophia know about me yet? I asked. I told her yesterday after I saw your message asking to meet. She's confused and hurt. She thought she'd found this wonderful father and a loving family. Now she's realizing she's been recruited for something ugly. I stood to leave, my mind spinning with questions I still couldn't answer. A trust fund I didn't know about, a plan to be done with me, a systematic replacement that had been in the works for 2 years. As I reached the door, Carla touched my arm gently. For what it's worth, I think he's always been a monster. I just didn't want to see it until he started using my daughter the same way he used me. I walked back to my car, feeling hollowed out, the phone in my pocket, heavy with unanswered questions. As soon as I started the engine, it vibrated with a new text message from an unknown number. I opened it expecting another message from Emily or Richard. Instead, it read, I need to speak with you about your mother. Your real mother. Meet me tomorrow. Come alone. James Shaw, solicitor. Instead of staying in Bristol, I drove straight back to Cornwall. I couldn't bear to be in the same county as my father, to breathe the same air, to exist in the same geography as his lies. The cottage in St. Ives felt like the only safe place I had left in the world, and I needed safety as I tried to process what Carla had told me. Sophia wasn't just some girl Richard had embraced. She was proof of a betrayal that stretched back 37 years. Proof that my father had been lying about who he was for my entire life. But strangely, as I unpacked my bag and made tea in the tiny cottage kitchen, I didn't feel the crushing weight I had expected. Instead, I felt something lighter, almost like relief. The family I had been mourning, the belonging I had been so desperate to earn through sacrifice and money, had never existed. You can't lose something you never had. The realization was strangely freeing. The next morning, I went back to Ruth's cafe. She took one look at me as I walked in and smiled. You look different today, lighter somehow. I think I just put something heavy down, I said, and it was true. Good for you, darling. Most people carry their burdens until they're buried with them. It takes courage to set them down while you're still breathing. We talked for an hour about nothing important, her garden the coming winter, a book she was reading, a normal conversation with someone who wanted nothing from me except perhaps the pleasure of her company. It was a revolutionary feeling. But that night alone in the cottage with the sound of the distant waves, I couldn't stop thinking about the solicitor's message. Your real mother. I had always believed Margaret was my biological mother. She had raised me, fed me, been physically present in all the ways a mother is supposed to be, even if she had been emotionally absent when it counted. The idea that she wasn't actually my mother seemed impossible, and yet the solicitor's certainty haunted me. At midnight, unable to sleep, I checked my email. There was a new message from James Shaw, sent minutes before. The subject line was urgent matter regarding the estate of Rebecca Morgan. I opened it with shaking hands. Ms. Barr, I am the solicitor for the estate of Rebecca Morgan, your biological mother. She passed away 35 years ago when you were 2 years old. I have been instructed to contact you regarding a trust fund established in your name which is set to be released on your 40th birthday. Recent activities by Richard Barr suggest he is attempting to fraudulently access these funds. We need to meet immediately. Please call my office as soon as possible. Time is of the essence. This matter involves not only your inheritance, but also questions surrounding the circumstances of your mother's death. I read the email 5 times, and with each reading my hands shook more. Rebecca Morgan. The name was completely unfamiliar, occupying no space in my memory. I opened a new browser tab and searched for it, adding Bristol 1990 based on the timeline. The obituary came up as the second result, a scanned clipping from the Bristol Herald. Rebecca Morgan, 28, passed away in a tragic car accident on the A37. She is survived by her sister Margaret Barr, her husband Richard Barr, and her daughter Lucy, aged 2. A service will be held at Riverside Chapel. Sister, not mother. Those words completely rearranged my understanding of my family's structure. Margaret wasn't my mother. She was my aunt who had raised me after my biological mother died. And Richard had been married to Rebecca, my biological mother, which meant his affair with Carla hadn't been during his marriage to Margaret. It had been during his marriage to my mother. I searched for more on Rebecca Morgan, but found almost nothing. No social media profiles, of course she had died before they existed. No other news stories, just that single brief perfunctory obituary that revealed nothing about who she was or how she had died other than a tragic car accident. A trust fund. £2 million set to be released when I turned 40, which was in 3 years. Suddenly, Richard's text message to Sophia made terrifying sense. Once we're done with Elle, the house and the trust fund will be yours. He wasn't just trying to replace me emotionally or drain me financially through monthly transfers. He was planning something bigger, something that involved preventing me from ever accessing the money my biological mother had left me. My phone rang at 7 a.m. the next morning, startling me from the brief sleep I had finally fallen into. It was an unknown number, but the area code was for Bristol. I answered cautiously. Lucy, it's me, Beth Carter, your parents' neighbour. Beth had been our neighbour for years, a kind woman who used to bring over biscuits at Christmas. Hi, Beth, is everything all right? I don't know how to tell you this, darling, but your father is telling everyone in the neighbourhood that you've been embezzling money from the family business. He's saying that's why you stopped sending money that you got caught and ran away. People are talking, Lucy. They're saying terrible things. A cold dread settled in my stomach. There is no family business. There hasn't been for a decade. I know, dear. That's why I'm calling. I don't believe him. But not everyone knows you like I do. He's very convincing. He showed some people a document said you forged his signature on some loans. I just thought you should know what's being said. But I hung up the phone. I sat there, the anger building in my chest like a physical pressure. Richard wasn't just ghosting me. He was preemptively destroying my reputation, creating a narrative where I was the villain, so that when whatever he was planning came to a head, people would already believe his side of the story. Then my phone buzzed with 3 fraud alerts in rapid succession. 3 credit cards had been opened in my name in the last 24 hours. The addresses listed were Richard's house in Bristol. He was actively ruining my credit-creating debt in my name building a paper trail that would make me look financially irresponsible or criminal. This wasn't a family drama. This was systematic destruction. Richard was waging war, and he had been planning it for longer than I had ever imagined. I opened my laptop and replied to James Shaw's email. I can meet tomorrow. Please send me your office address and any information you have on Rebecca Morgan's death. I need to understand everything.
No.
His reply came within minutes, even though it was 4 a.m. in Bristol. He must have been waiting for me to respond. My office is in Bristol. I can see you at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I'm attaching Rebecca Morgan's death certificate and the police report from her accident. Please read them before we meet. There are inconsistencies that were never properly investigated. I downloaded the attachments with trembling fingers, but it was the final line of his email that made my blood run cold. Your mother left you £2 million in a trust fund. Your father has been trying to access that money for 15 years. If he succeeds, you will lose everything, including the truth about how she really died. The next day, I was back in London, needing some time alone to process the truth about Rebecca Morgan and prepare to meet with James Shaw. But the moment I walked into my flat, my phone started buzzing with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. University friends, former colleagues, even the receptionist at my dentist's office. They were all asking the same question. Is everything okay? We saw the article. What article? I opened my laptop and searched my name. The third result made my stomach clench. Local businessman's family struggles after daughter cuts financial support. The article was from the Bristol Herald, a small local paper I'd never heard of. It was dated 2 days ago. I read it with mounting horror. Richard was quoted extensively playing the part of the devoted father wounded by his daughter's betrayal. We raised Lucy with strong family values, he said. We sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. Now that she's successful, she's turned her back on us in our time of need. It's heartbreaking. The article went on to describe how Richard and Margaret were facing foreclosure, how Emily's wedding had to be drastically scaled back, and how the family was struggling while their daughter, a wealthy financial consultant, lived comfortably in London. Anonymous sources, clearly Richard's friends or people he had manipulated, added their 2 cents. Lucy changed after she got that fancy job. She forgot where she came from. Family should come first. What she's doing is shameful. Her parents are such good people. They don't deserve this. There was no mention of the 15 years I had sent money. No mention of the house I had bought. No mention of my being cut out of Emily's wedding. Richard had expertly crafted a narrative where he was the victim and I was the villain. And he'd done it so skillfully that even I, for a split second, almost questioned myself. The comments section was worse. Hundreds of people who didn't know me, who didn't know the situation, had already decided I was a terrible person. Kids today have no respect for their parents. She should be ashamed of herself. I hope karma gets her. Family always comes first. Each comment was like a tiny stab, a death, by 1,000 judgments from strangers who thought they understood my life from a 4-paragraph article. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. University friends texting with concern. Lucy, what's going on? This doesn't sound like you. Do you need help? We're here for you. Their kindness somehow made it worse because I knew for every one person who reached out with concern, there were 10 others who had read the article and simply written me off as exactly what Richard claimed I was. I was still sitting there staring at my laptop screen when Karen called from the office. Lucy, there's a reporter here asking for you. He has a camera crew. Should I send them away? Yes. Tell them I'm not available. But I could hear shouting in the background, a man's voice demanding to speak with me, insisting it was for a legitimate story on elder financial abuse. I grabbed my keys and drove to the office, arriving to find a man with an expensive-looking camera and a woman with a microphone standing in the lobby. Karen looked distressed, and my manager David was trying to calmly ask them to leave. The moment I walked in, the camera swung towards me. The woman shoved the microphone in my face. Lucy Barr. We're doing a story on adult children who abandon their elderly parents. Your father says you've stolen from the family and cut off all financial support. Do you have a response? I don't know who you are, but you need to leave our offices, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Your father has produced documents proving you forged commercial loans in his name. He claims you've been embezzling family money for years. Are these allegations true? That's when I realized this wasn't a legitimate news outlet. The camera had no station logo. The woman's microphone had no identifying marks. It was a setup, something Richard had likely paid for, designed to look like real journalism, but serving as pure biased propaganda. This conversation is over, I said, and walked towards my office. Wealthy daughter refuses to explain why she's letting her parents lose their home, the woman shouted after me, making sure her words were captured by the camera. 2 hours later, the video was on YouTube. The title, London Financial Consultant Refuses to Address Elder Abuse Allegations. The editing was deliberately misleading, cutting my responses to make me look guilty and evasive. The comments were even more vicious than the newspaper article. Within hours, it had thousands of views. The next morning, one of my long-term clients called to cancel our quarterly meeting. Lucy, I'm sorry, but I saw that video. I have concerns about your character and judgment. I need to move my portfolio to another consultant. No amount of explaining would change his mind. Richard wasn't just attacking my family standing. He was systematically destroying my professional reputation. The career I had built from nothing. The one thing that was supposed to be mine alone. Then my bank called. Ms. Barr, we need to discuss a serious matter regarding a business loan taken out in your name 3 years ago. The loan is in default, and we are proceeding with legal action. Can you come in today? 2 hours later, I was sitting in a stark boardroom opposite a grim-faced bank manager and his solicitor. They showed me paperwork for a £300,000 business loan supposedly for Barr Family Consulting Services. My signature was on every page. Except I had never taken out this loan, never heard of this company, never signed these documents. That's not my signature, I said, my voice shaking. Ms. Barr, we have a handwriting analysis confirming that it is. Then your analysis is wrong. I have never seen these documents before in my life. I walked out of the bank and immediately called a solicitor, a woman named Sarah King who specialized in fraud cases. She looked over the documents I had photographed and was silent for a full minute. This is sophisticated, she said finally. The signature is a forgery, but it's a good one. Whoever did this had access to your real signature and took the time to make it look authentic. Proving it's a forgery will require forensic document analysis, and even then there are no guarantees. Do you have any idea who might have done this? My father, Richard Barr. Sarah's expression didn't change. Can you prove that he's the only one who would benefit? The loan was taken out 3 years ago, right after I bought the house for him. The money went into an account he controlled. That's a motive, but it's not proof. This will be an expensive and time-consuming fight, and there's no guarantee we'll win. If we can't prove forgery before the court date, you could be facing criminal charges for loan fraud. How long do we have, Chow? 6 weeks. And Ms. Barr. There's something else you should know. Richard Barr is listed as a witness for the prosecution. He's claiming you forged his signature on business documents, and that this loan was part of a pattern of financial crimes you've committed against his family. I sat there in Sarah's office, feeling the walls close in, and I finally understood the full scope of what Richard had been planning. This wasn't just about replacing me with Sophia or cutting me out of the family. This was about destroying me completely. He had spent years building a trap, creating a fraudulent paper trail, cultivating witnesses who would testify against me, preparing for the day I finally rebelled against his control. And now that day had come, and I was standing in the wreckage of my reputation, with a criminal investigation hanging over my head, and my own father preparing to testify that I was a criminal. Sarah looked at me with something approaching pity. Ms. Barr, I have to ask you directly, is there any possibility these signatures are authentic? Is there any chance you signed something you don't remember? No. Then we have 6 weeks to prove your father is a liar and a criminal, and he has a 35-year head start on convincing people he's a good man. Sarah worked fast. Within 48 hours, she had retained a forensic document examiner named Dr. Patricia Wolfe, a woman who had testified in federal fraud cases and whose credentials filled 3 pages. Dr. Wolfe spent 2 days analyzing the loan documents, comparing them to my legitimate signatures from tax returns, employment contracts, and bank records. When she called us into her lab to go over her findings, her expression was grim but certain. These are definite forgeries, she said, pulling up side-by-side images on a computer screen. Look at the pressure patterns. When someone signs their own name, the pressure is fluid and confident. These signatures show hesitation marks, places where the pen has stopped and started, which is typical of someone tracing a light pencil outline. The forger was skilled, but not skilled enough. She clicked to another image. More importantly, look at this tremor pattern in the downstrokes. It appears on every single one of the forged signatures, but on none of your authentic ones. Whoever did this was either elderly or nervous, causing micro tremors by Jim that are invisible to the naked eye, but show up under magnification. Can you testify to this in court? Sarah asked. Without a doubt. This is a flagrant forgery. I'd stake my professional reputation on it. But Dr. Wolfe had found something even more damning. Ms. Barr, according to the date on the loan application, you signed these documents on March 15th, 3 years ago. Can you tell me where you were on that day? I pulled up my calendar and scrolled back 3 years. I was in London. There was a financial conference. I presented a paper on retirement planning strategies. Can you prove that? I opened my email and found the confirmation. Flight bookings, hotel reservations, conference registration. My passport showed the stamps. Departed from Heathrow on March 13th, returned on March 18th. I was on a different continent when I had supposedly walked into a bank in Bristol and signed loan documents. This is perfect, Sarah said, a real smile spreading across her face. Not only is the signature a forgery, but you have an irrefutable alibi. Richard had no way of knowing you would keep such detailed records. Dr. Wolfe presented more analysis. The loan amount, £300,000, was deposited into an account registered to Barr Family Consulting Services. That company was registered in Bristol with Richard Barr as CEO and you as CFO, though I imagine you never consented to that title. I've never even heard of the company. It's a shell company. It has no real business operations, no employees, no revenue except for this one fraudulent loan. The money was then transferred within days to Richard Barr's personal accounts. He used it to pay off gambling debts, credit card bills, and a deposit on a new Range Rover. This isn't a misunderstanding, Ms. Barr. This is calculated, premeditated theft. The next day, I met with James Shaw in his office in central Bristol. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes and an intensity that made me trust him immediately. The walls of his office were lined with law degrees and certificates, but the thing that caught my eye was a framed photo of a young Asian woman who looked very much like him. My sister, he said, noticing my gaze. She died in a car crash 15 years ago. Her husband tried to collect on the life insurance even though they were separated, and she had named her daughter as the beneficiary. I became an estate lawyer because of that case. I don't like seeing people victimized by family they trusted. He opened a thick file folder. Your mother, Rebecca Morgan, came to my father's law firm in 1989 when she was pregnant with you. She wanted to set up a trust, and she specifically did not want her husband to know about it. My father, who passed away 5 years ago, handled the estate. Before he died, he asked me to take over as trustee and to contact you when the time came. Why didn't she want my father to know? James took out a leather-bound journal with pages yellowed by time. She kept a diary. It was left with the trust documents, his need for financial control, his explosive temper. She suspected he was embezzling from his company. There's an entry from 2 months before she died that says, "If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Richard knows I'm going to the police." My hands went cold. What happened to her? Single vehicle accident on a country road. Brake failure. The police ruled it an accident, but your mother had the car serviced just a week before. The mechanic confirmed the brakes were in perfect working order. Are you saying my father killed her? I'm saying there are questions that were never properly investigated. But that's not why I contacted you now. The trust your mother set up contains £2 million invested conservatively over 35 years. It's set to be released to you on your 40th birthday in 3 years. But there are conditions. You have to be alive mentally, competent, have no criminal record, and have no outstanding debts over £50,000. The understanding hit me like a physical blow. The forged loan. Exactly. Richard has been systematically trying to stop you from receiving this inheritance. The £300,000 debt in your name would void the trust. If he had managed to get you convicted of fraud, the criminal record would disqualify you as well. And there's one more thing. James pulled out another document. In 2019, Richard filed a motion attempting to add Emily Barr as an alternative beneficiary, claiming she was also Rebecca's daughter, which is a lie. Rebecca died before Richard married Margaret. Emily is Richard and Margaret's biological child. The claim was fraudulent, but it's been sitting in probate court unchallenged because we couldn't contact you. Richard had made sure your address of record was his own. So if I had died or been disqualified, everything would have gone to Emily, who would have immediately signed it all over to Richard. He's been planning this for years, James said quietly. Maybe decades. I sat there in James Shaw's office, surrounded by the evidence of my father's betrayal, and I felt something shift inside me. The grief and confusion that had plagued me for weeks crystallized into a cold, clear rage. I had spent 25 years thinking I owed my family everything because I had survived Daniel's death. But I didn't owe them anything. They owed me. I want to press charges, I told Sarah later that day. Identity theft, fraud, forgery, whatever applies, everything. That's a serious step. Are you sure? I have forensic proof of forgery. I have proof he stole £300,000 using my name. I have documentation of 15 years of financial abuse. Yes, I'm sure. Sarah nodded, a look of approval on her face. We need to move quickly. The loan fraud case is already in motion, and we need to change the narrative before Richard can testify against you. There's one more thing, I said. That house my parents are living in, the one I've been paying the mortgage on for 3 years. Can I buy the loan from the bank and put the house in my name before the foreclosure goes through? Sarah's smile was sharp. The mortgage is in arrears, so the bank would probably be happy to sell the note at a discount to get their money back quickly. Yes, we can do that. It would make you the legal owner and the mortgage holder. Do it. And don't tell them. Let them think the foreclosure is still happening. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to my family's manipulation. I was strategizing, planning, preparing to dismantle everything Richard had built on my pain. And I had one more move to make, one final confrontation that would bring everything into the open. Emily's wedding was in 3 weeks. I wasn't invited, but I was going anyway. And I was bringing receipts. I was back in London preparing the legal paperwork with Sarah when Karen buzzed my office intercom. "Lucy, your sister is here. She says it's urgent." I hadn't spoken to Emily in over a month, not since that cold text telling me the wedding was for close family only. My first instinct was to refuse to see her, but something made me hesitate. Emily never came to London. She barely left Bristol unless someone else was paying for the trip. If she was here, Richard must have sent her. "Send her in," I said, and quickly opened the voice memo app on my phone, setting it face down on my desk. The microphone exposed. Emily walked in looking like she'd been crying her eyes red and puffy. She was wearing a designer jacket I recognized from her Instagram posts last month, and carrying a handbag that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. But the thing that caught my eye was her brand new AirPods Pro, the expensive ones that cost £250. An interesting choice for someone who supposedly couldn't afford a honeymoon deposit. "Lucy," she said. Her voice choked. "I've missed you so much. Can we please talk?" I gestured to the chair opposite my desk, watching her carefully. She sat down and immediately launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "This whole wedding thing got completely out of hand. I've been so stressed, and I think Dad is taking his financial anxiety out on you unfairly. It wasn't right. You're my sister, and I want you at my wedding. I should never have let Dad talk me out of it." She kept touching her ears, nervously adjusting the AirPods. Something was definitely off about this performance. "Emily, why are you really here?" "Because I love you," she said, tears now streaming down her face. "Because this family is falling apart, and I don't want to lose you over money and Dad's pride. Please, Lucy, can we just forget all of this and move on?" "Forget what exactly? Forget that I've bankrolled your lifestyle for 15 years. Forget that you told me I wasn't real family. I never meant that. I was just stressed about the wedding, and Dad was putting so much pressure on me about the budget." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Can I use your loo? I've been driving for 3 hours and I'm desperate." "Down the hall, second door on the left." The moment Emily was out of the room, I leaned forward and looked at what she had left on my desk. Her phone's screen up and unlocked. The screen showed a recording app running. The timer read 11 minutes and counting. Above it was a text conversation with my father, and I could see the most recent message. "Get her to admit she stopped the payments on purpose. We need proof of financial abuse." So that was it. Emily had come here with a hidden recorder, trying to bait me into confessing to something that could be twisted into elder abuse or financial manipulation. I had maybe 2 minutes before she came back. I took a quick photo of her screen with my own phone, making sure to capture the recording app and the text from Richard. Then I sat back, my mind racing with possibilities. I could confront her, but that would just put her on the defensive and end the conversation. Or I could give her exactly what she came for, but on my terms. When Emily came back, I had made my decision. "You're right," I said quietly. "This has all gotten out of hand. I'm sorry I cut off the money so abruptly. That must have been very frightening for you and Mum and Dad." Emily's face lit up with a relief that looked almost genuine. "So you'll start sending money again?" I didn't say that. But I do want to understand what happened. Why wasn't I invited to the wedding in the first place? I need to hear it from you, not from Dad. Emily glanced at her phone on the desk, then back at me. She thought she was winning. "Honestly, Dad said you were just the family's cash machine, and we didn't need you anymore now that Sophia was here." He said once you'd served your purpose, we should just cut you off. He's been planning it for a while. I kept my expression neutral, projecting sympathy, encouraging her to continue. That must have been hard for you to hear him say about me. Not really, Emily said with a shrug, a gesture that held more honesty than anything else she had said. I mean, you were always his favourite, Lucy. Even when he was horrible to you, you had all his attention. I was invisible unless I went along with him. Sophia actually appreciates us. She's grateful for what we give her. And what have you given her? A family, a place to belong. Dad is so happy since she came into our lives. He's different with her, lighter, more generous. It made me realize maybe the problem was never him. Maybe it was you. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away, but I held my composure. Tell me about the house. Dad posted that he gave it to you as a wedding gift. Emily beamed, the tears now completely gone. Yes, he's signing it over to me before the foreclosure goes through, so no one can lay a claim on it or put a lien on it or anything. It'll be a fresh start for me and Jake. The foreclosure. You know that's happening because I stopped paying the mortgage, right? Well, yes, but Dad says it won't matter soon. He says when you turn 40, we'll get that money, somehow the trust fund from your birth mother or something. Dad's been working on it for years. My heart was racing, but I kept my voice steady. He told you about the trust fund? Like a year ago. He explained that your birth mother left you money, but that there were ways to contest it since she wasn't married to Dad when she died or something. Honestly, I don't get all the legal stuff. I just know Dad has a plan. And Sophia, when did you find out about her? Dad introduced us about a year ago. He told me to start building a relationship with my real sister, someone who understood what family loyalty meant. I was confused at first because you're my sister, but then I got it. Sophia doesn't make everything about her. She doesn't hold money over our heads. She just loves us. I let her talk for another 10 minutes, and she revealed everything. How Richard planned to frame me for fraud using the forged loan documents. How he had told Emily to record this conversation to get proof that I'd admit to abandoning them financially. How he had promised that once I was dealt with, the family would finally be stable and happy, free from my judgment and control. When she finally wound down, satisfied, she had gotten what she came for. I stood up. Thank you for coming, Emily. This has been really enlightening. So you'll think about helping us out? Maybe just until after the wedding? Oh, I'll definitely be thinking about it. And as she grabbed her phone and headed for the door, I called out to her. Emily. She turned hopeful. Save the date. I'll be at your wedding after all. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The second she was gone, I immediately backed up my recording to 3 different cloud accounts, then emailed it to Sarah with the subject line, Evidence for Countersuit. An hour later, Sarah called back, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. Lucy, this is gold. She's confessed to knowledge of fraud conspiracy, to commit identity theft, and participating in a scheme to steal your inheritance. With this recording, we can add Emily as a co-defendant in the criminal case. No, I said. Not yet. Let her think she got what she wanted. Let them all think they're winning. I want them to be comfortable and confident when it all comes crashing down. When do you plan for that to happen? October 15th. At the wedding. The morning after Emily's visit, I sat in Sarah King's office with all the evidence laid out before us, like pieces of a puzzle that finally formed a complete damning picture. The forensic analysis of the forged signatures, the bank records showing the theft of £300,000 in my name. The credit card fraud alerts Emily's recorded confession, admitting knowledge of Richard's schemes, and Rebecca's diary documenting a murder that had been disguised as an accident for 35 years. We have more than enough to file criminal charges, Sarah said, drumming her fingers on the boardroom table. Identity theft, wire fraud, forgery, attempted trust fraud, and filing false police reports. The evidence is overwhelming. Do it, I said. File everything. Sarah nodded and began to draft the complaint. As I watched her work, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to my family's chaos. I was controlling it. I was choosing when and how this confrontation would happen, and I was doing it with the law on my side. There's something else we can do, Sarah said, looking up from her laptop. We can file for an emergency protective order. It would stop Richard from opening any more accounts in your name, making any large financial transactions, or contacting you directly. Given the evidence of ongoing fraud, a judge would grant it immediately. And how long would that take? If we file today, it could be approved within 48 hours. Richard wouldn't know about it until he's served with the papers. Perfect. I want him to feel secure right up until the moment it all falls apart. Sarah filed the complaint and the protective order that afternoon. 2 days later, she called to tell me they had both been approved. Somewhere in Bristol, a process server would be looking for Richard Barr to hand him papers that would completely change his life. But that would come later. First, I had one more move to make. I called the mortgage department at First National Bank and asked to speak to someone in their distressed assets division. After being transferred twice, I got a manager named David Torres who sounded tired and overworked. Mr. Torres, I'm calling about a property in foreclosure, the Barr residence on Maple Street in Bristol. I'd like to make an offer to purchase the promissory note. There was a pause. Are you a real estate investor, Ms. Barr? I'm the daughter who has been paying that mortgage for the last 3 years. I have documentation showing every payment came from my account. My father's name is on the deed, but it was my money that kept the house out of foreclosure until recently. Now I want to buy it outright. This is unusual. But if you're serious, we would be very interested in discussing it. The property is set for a foreclosure auction in 60 days, and we would prefer to avoid that process. I'm very serious. What's the outstanding balance? £180,000. I thought of the trust fund, the £2 million my biological mother had set aside to protect me from exactly this kind of situation. James had arranged for an emergency advance of £200,000, given the circumstances of the fraud and my immediate need for legal defence funds. I can wire the full balance in cash within 72 hours. In exchange, I want the title to the property transferred immediately to my name and the foreclosure cancelled. And I want this transaction processed discreetly without the current occupants being notified. David Torres was silent for a moment. Ms. Barr, we don't normally keep property transactions secret from the homeowners. My father has been committing fraud using my identity. There are criminal charges pending. I am the victim here, Mr. Torres, and I am offering you a simple solution to a messy foreclosure. You get your money, you clear the debt, and you avoid legal entanglements. All I ask is that you do not publicize the transaction until the paperwork is filed. Let me speak to my supervisor. Can I call you back in an hour? He called back in 30 minutes. We can do this. Wire the funds to our escrow account, and we will have the title paperwork ready by close of business on Friday. On Friday afternoon, I was the legal owner of 847 Maple Street, Bristol, the house where Richard, Margaret, and Emily lived. The house I had been paying for since I was 34. The house my biological mother had helped buy before Richard murdered her. I had the deed sent by express courier to James Shaw's office for safekeeping. Don't file it with the county recorder yet, I told him. I want the official transfer to go public on October 15th. That's Emily's wedding day. Exactly. 3 weeks before the wedding, the cream-coloured envelope arrived at my flat in London. The return address was my parents' house, the house that was now secretly mine. I opened it carefully, half expecting another crossed-out invitation. But this time, My name was written in Margaret's handwriting on the front. Please come. I'm begging you. Inside was a formal wedding invitation with my name properly listed under the family section, and behind it, a handwritten note on Margaret's personal stationery. Lucy, I know I've failed you. Your father doesn't know I'm sending this. Please, if you ever loved me as your mother, come to this wedding. I need to tell you something in person. Something about your real mother, Rebecca. I can't write it. Richard can't know. I don't have much time left, and I need to make things right before it's too late. Please. Margaret. I read the note 3 times, trying to decide if it was genuine or another manipulation. The "not much time left" could mean Margaret was ill, or it could be emotional blackmail. But something in the shaky, desperate handwriting made me think it was real. I called James Shaw. Margaret sent me a wedding invitation. She wants to talk about Rebecca. Do you trust her? No. But I'm going anyway. Not for reconciliation. For revelation. I booked 2 flights to Bristol for October 14th. One for me, one for Sarah King. Then I called the wedding venue, identified myself as Emily's wedding planner, and asked about their AV setup. They had a full projection system, speakers, and tech support. Perfect. I RSVP'd with the formal card. Lucy Barr, +1. Wouldn't miss it for the world. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah and I compiled everything into a presentation, the forged loan documents with the forensic analysis. The timeline of Richard's fraud, Emily's recorded confession, excerpts from Rebecca's diary, and the property deed showing I was now the owner. We practiced the timing, rehearsed responses to potential objections, and coordinated with the local police department, who agreed to have officers on standby given the circumstances. Are you sure you want to do it this way? Sarah asked the night before we flew out. We can handle this quietly through the courts. It doesn't have to be a public spectacle. Yes, it does, I replied. Richard built his entire life on a lie. He convinced an entire town that I was the ungrateful daughter while he played the devoted father. He murdered my mother and got away with it for 35 years. This doesn't end in a courtroom where he can spin the narrative. This ends in front of 200 witnesses who will see exactly who he is. I had one goal for that wedding, to make sure everyone saw exactly who Richard Barr really was. Not with words, but with evidence they couldn't deny. October 15th dawned a perfect autumn day, the kind that makes West Country vineyards look like they're straight off a postcard. I stood at the back of the ceremony space with Sarah by my side, watching 200 guests settle into white wooden chairs arranged in neat rows, facing a flower-draped arch. The venue was beautiful, expensive, exactly the kind of wedding Emily had always dreamed of. I wondered if she'd given a single thought to where the money to pay for it had come from. Richard was near the front, chatting animatedly with a group of men I recognized as his poker buddies and partners from his failed business ventures. He was in his element, wearing an expensive suit, playing the part of the proud father. As the string quartet began to play, he stepped forward and held up a hand, calling for everyone's attention. "Before we begin," he announced, his voice booming across the vineyard with practiced confidence, "I want to say a few words about family. Family is about sticking together through thick and thin. It's about sacrifice and loyalty and putting each other first. No matter what challenges come your way. My family has faced some struggles recently, but we have stood strong because we understand what truly matters. We don't abandon each other when times get tough. We don't turn our backs on the people who raised us." Several guests glanced towards the back of the venue where I was standing. Their expressions were a mixture of pity and judgment. They had all read the newspaper article, seen the YouTube video, and heard Richard's version of events, the one where I was the villain. Richard Judd deliberately caught my eye, and smiled a cold, triumphant smirk that said he thought he had won. Margaret sat in the front row, wearing a pale blue dress that hung loosely on her frame. She looked more fragile than I remembered, her skin almost grey, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes darted around the crowd, nervous searching until they landed on me. Something passed between us. Not forgiveness, but an understanding. Sophia sat on the aisle in the maid of honour's spot, wearing the lavender dress Emily had chosen for her bridal party. She looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with everyone. I wondered how much she truly knew about the role she had been recruited to play in Richard's scheme. The bridal march began. Emily appeared at the back of the aisle in a dress that cost more than my car on the arm of one of Jake's groomsmen, as Richard was due to meet her halfway. But before she could take her first step, I made my move. I walked down the centre aisle, my steps measured and deliberate. The music faltered and stopped, heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd. Emily's face went from radiant to ashen in the space of 2 seconds. Richard shot out of his chair, his face flushed. His face. "What are you doing here? You're not invited." "Actually, I said calmly, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. I gestured towards Margaret. "Mum invited me." Margaret gave a slight nod, tears already welling in her eyes. "You need to leave," Richard said, taking a step towards me. "This is a private family event." "That's exactly why I'm here," I said, "because this is about family, and there's something everyone in this room needs to know before they witness this wedding built on lies." I took out my phone and handed it to the AV technician, whom I had paid £500 to be ready for this exact moment. He plugged it into the venue's sound system with practiced efficiency. Richard started towards us, but Sarah stepped between him and the tech booth. Her solicitor's credentials and calm authority were enough to make him pause. Emily's voice suddenly filled the venue through hidden speakers, crystal clear and undeniable. "Dad said you were just the family's cash machine, and we didn't need you anymore now that Sophia was here. He said once you'd served your purpose, we should just cut you off." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily made a sound like a wounded animal and lunged for the sound system, but Sarah blocked her path. "This is slander," Richard yelled. "This recording is illegal." "Actually, it's not," Sarah said coolly. "England is a one-party consent state for recordings, and Lucy was present for the entire conversation." The recording continued, Emily's voice casual and cruel. "You were always his favourite. Sophia actually appreciates us." And then the most damning part. "Dad says when you turn 40, we'll get that money somehow. The trust fund from your birth mother or something." I let it play to the end, watching the faces in the crowd as their expressions shifted from confusion to shock to dawning comprehension. When it was finished, I addressed them directly. "Here's what else you need to know. The man who just lectured you on family loyalty forged my signature to steal £300,000. He has opened credit cards in my name to ruin my credit. He is trying to steal a £2 million trust fund that my biological mother left for me. Because Margaret is not my biological mother. My biological mother was Rebecca Morgan Margaret's sister. She died in a car crash 35 years ago. An accident that was never properly investigated." Margaret let out a sob. Several people turned to stare at her. "And as of 3 days ago..." I continued, pulling a folded document from my purse. "I own the house they have all been living in. The house I have been paying for since I was 34. The house my father has been claiming as a wedding gift for Emily." I held up the property deed, my name clearly visible on the official county document. Richard's face went from red to purple. He lunged towards me, his hands raised, screaming words that would later be played back in court. You ungrateful little... After everything I did for you, after I took you in when your mother died, after I gave you a home. He didn't finish. Two police officers stepped in from the back of the venue. The timing was perfect. Sarah had coordinated it all to wait for the confrontation to let Richard incriminate himself further, and then to serve the warrant in front of everyone. Richard Barr, you are under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, and forgery. The older officer's voice was professional, almost bored, as if he arrested fathers at their daughters' weddings every day. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Mobile phones came out all over the crowd, dozens of them recording as Richard was put in handcuffs. Emily collapsed on the ground in her expensive wedding dress, her carefully styled hair coming undone as she sobbed. Jake stood frozen at the altar, clearly trying to process what his wedding had just become. Sophia slipped out a side exit, her lavender dress, disappearing into the vineyard. Margaret stood up, slowly walked over to me, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "Thank you. I couldn't have done it on my own. I tried for 35 years, but I couldn't." As the officers led Richard towards the police car, he turned to shout one last thing at me, his voice cracking with rage. "You'll regret this. You're not even my daughter. You never were." Those words should have destroyed me. 30 years ago they would have. Even 30 days ago they might have. But standing there in that vineyard, surrounded by 200 witnesses who had just watched Richard Barr's carefully constructed facade crumble, I felt something I had never felt before. The last chain broke. I was finally free. Richard spent his first night in a county jail cell, while I sat in my hotel room and watched his world fall apart on social media in real time. Someone at the wedding had live-streamed the confrontation, and by morning the video had over 3 million views. The clip of Emily's voice piping through the speakers, admitting I was just the family's cash machine, was being turned into dozens of reaction videos. The news outlets picked up the story with headlines that made me feel both vindicated and empty. Bristol man arrested for stealing £300,000 from daughter at wedding. Father's financial fraud exposed during daughter's ceremony. Sarah called at 6 a.m. with an update. His bail hearing is this afternoon. Bail is set at £50,000. Given the evidence and the flight risk assessment, the judge isn't being lenient. Can he make it? Not without help. All his accounts are frozen pending the fraud investigation. And from what I can see, he's already deep in debt. He owes more than he has. If no one posts his bail, he'll remain in custody until the trial. I thought about Margaret, about Emily, about whether either of them would be able or willing to scrape together the money to free him. Then I realized it didn't matter to me. Whether Richard was in jail or out on bail didn't change what he had done or what was coming for him. By noon, local news stations by Britain were running segments on the wedding showdown that went global, interviewing people who had known Richard for decades. A former business partner went on record saying he had always suspected Richard was cooking the books. A neighbour said she had thought it was strange how he always had money for new Range Rovers, but claimed to be financially struggling. The narrative was finally shifting after 35 years under Richard's control. Meanwhile, Emily's life was unraveling. Jake called off the engagement 2 days after the wedding that never was. I heard this through mutual acquaintances who couldn't resist texting me updates, perhaps feeling guilty for having believed Richard's version of events for so long. "I can't marry into this," Jake had apparently said. "I can't build a life with someone who thinks using people is normal." Emily tried to stay in the house, but I had already sent the formal eviction notices. She had 30 days to vacate the property that was now legally mine. She went to stay with her maid of honor, a girl named Brittany, who had been her friend since school, but that lasted less than a week. Brittany posted on Instagram, Sometimes you don't realize how toxic people are until you have to live with them. Hashtag boundaries are important. Emily was tagged in the post, which was quickly deleted, but the screenshots lived forever. I watched Emily's downward spiral in real time on social media. She would post long, rambling captions about betrayal and family loyalty, about how I had orchestrated her humiliation and ruined her life out of jealousy. But the comments were brutal. You called your sister a cash machine on tape. Actions have consequences. Maybe don't participate in fraud next time. Your dad literally stole £300,000 from her and you're the victim. One by one, Emily's friends stopped interacting with her posts. Sophia blocked her completely and deleted all her social media accounts, vanishing as quickly as she had appeared in our lives. Emily tried calling Lucy 17 times in one afternoon. I knew because she left voicemails that started with pleading and ended with screaming. I didn't listen to them all the way through. Sarah advised me to log them, but not to respond. What struck me most was that Emily seemed genuinely confused about why people weren't siding with her. She had spent 29 years in a reality where she was the favored child, where everything she wanted was given to her, where other people existed to serve her needs. The sudden introduction of consequences, no money, no house, no wedding, no friends, had shattered her entire identity. She didn't know how to be a person who had to earn things or face the fallout of her choices. 3 days after Richard's arrest, Margaret called and asked if I could meet her. Not at the house. I can't be there anymore, she said. But I'm at a little coffee shop in central Bristol. Her voice sounded hollow, decades older than it had a week ago. I almost said no, but something in her tone made me agree. She was waiting for me at a corner table when I arrived, and I barely recognized her. She had lost weight she didn't have to lose. Her skin had a greyish pallor, and her hands trembled as she lifted her coffee cup. She looked like someone on the verge of an ending, though I didn't know yet if it was her marriage, her life, or just her ability to keep living with lies. Before you hear this from lawyers or the police or reporters, she said without preamble, sliding a brown manila envelope across the table, you need to hear it from me. Inside the envelope were papers I had never seen before. Medical records. Police reports, copies of Rebecca's diary, which I had only read excerpts from through James Shaw. Margaret's voice was almost a whisper. Rebecca was my younger sister. We were so close growing up, only 3 years apart. When she married Richard, I was 21, and I thought he was charming. Everyone did. He knew how to make people believe him. When did you realize what he really was? When Rebecca got pregnant with you, he changed. He became controlling, dictating where she went, who she talked to. One night, Rebecca called me crying. She said she'd found proof that Richard was embezzling from his company. She'd copied everything: invoices, bank statements, records of fake employees. She was going to the authorities. Margaret's hands shook even harder. A week later, her car went off a cliff on the A37. The police said it was brake failure, an accident. They did a basic investigation and closed the case. But Rebecca had just had the car serviced. The mechanic had said everything was perfect. You think Richard cut her brakes? I know he did. After the funeral, I went to Rebecca's childhood room at our mother's house, where she told me she kept important papers hidden. I found her diary. The last entry said, if something happens to me, check the car. Richard knows I'm going to the police. I felt cold, despite the hot coffee in my hands. You've known for 35 years that he murdered her. I was 23 with a 2-year-old niece who had just lost her mother. Richard came to me and said we had to make it work for your sake. He said I should raise you, that he would marry me to make it legal, that we would be a family. And then he said, if I ever told anyone what Rebecca suspected, he would claim I was his accomplice in the embezzlement, that I had helped him steal the money, and Rebecca had found out. And that's why she died. He said I would go to prison and you would end up in the care system. So you married your sister's murderer. I thought I was protecting you, Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. I thought if I just stayed quiet, if I kept you close, I could keep you safe from him. But all I did was trap us both. Margaret's shaking hands pushed another document across the table. I was a coward for 35 years, but I kept the proof, copies of Rebecca's diary. The police report the service records from the mechanic a week before she died. And I'm ready to tell the police what I know, that your father murdered your mother. Margaret was silent for a long moment, just staring at her trembling hands as if they belonged to someone else. Then she took a key out of her purse, an old brass key with a numbered tag. There's more, she said. Things I've kept hidden all these years because I didn't know what to do with them. I need you to see it all before I go to the police. We drove in silence to a storage facility on the outskirts of Bristol, the kind of place with rows of identical orange doors and security cameras that probably didn't work. Margaret's unit was number 847, the same as her house address. She'd been paying for it for 35 years, she told me, always in cash, so Richard wouldn't see it on the bank statements. Inside, cardboard boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, all labelled in Margaret's precise handwriting: Rebecca's clothes, Rebecca's books, Rebecca's papers. In the back corner was a large plastic tub with a red lid. Margaret pointed to it with a trembling finger. This is what will matter to the police. We opened it together. Inside was Rebecca's original diary, the one James Shaw had copied, along with folders full of documents, invoices, bank statements, contracts for companies that existed only on paper. Rebecca had documented everything methodically, as if she knew she was building a case that might have to outlive her. I have copies of all of this hidden at my mother's house. An entry dated 3 weeks before her death read, "If I report this, Richard will lose everything. The company, the house, probably his freedom. He told me yesterday that if I betray him, I'll regret it. I'm scared, but I can't let him get away with robbing innocent people. These aren't faceless corporations he's defrauding. It's families, small business owners, people who trusted him." But what Margaret showed me next sent a chill down my spine. At the bottom of the tub, carefully wrapped in layers of plastic bags and sealed with yellow duct tape, was a piece of metal tubing about 8 inches long, a brake line. The day after Rebecca died, I couldn't sleep. Margaret said, her voice thick. I kept thinking about what she'd written in her diary, so I went down to the scrapyard where they'd towed her car. I told them I wanted something to remember her by, some small part of the car. They let me walk around. That's when I saw it. The brake line just hanging there, cut clean through. I took it. I didn't know what to do with it, but I knew I couldn't let it be crushed with the rest of the car. You've kept this sealed like this for 35 years. I've never opened it since the day I wrapped it. I thought maybe one day it would matter, or maybe it wouldn't. But at least the truth would exist somewhere, even if I was too afraid to tell it. The next morning, we took everything to the headquarters of the Avon and Somerset police. Margaret had called ahead and specifically asked to speak to someone who handled cold cases. A detective inspector, Maria Santos, met us in a conference room, a woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and an attention so focused it made me believe she actually cared about finding truth in old files. First, she examined Rebecca's diary, reading the entries and making notes. Then she carefully cut the seal on the brake line, photographing each step, documenting the chain of custody, even though it had been broken for decades. She held it up to the light, turning it slowly, and I saw her expression shift from professional interest to a grim certainty. I need to send this to the state crime lab, she said. But even to the naked eye, this isn't gradual wear and tear. Look at this edge. It's a clean cut, not a tear or a pressure rupture. Someone used a tool on this. 2 weeks later, D.I. Santos called us back to her office. The forensics report was on her desk, 30 pages of technical analysis that boiled down to a single damning conclusion. The brake line showed clear evidence of having been deliberately severed with a cutting tool, likely a pair of wire cutters or heavy-duty shears. The cut pattern showed multiple compression marks, indicating the perpetrator had to work at it, applying pressure at several points to get through the reinforced tubing. Most damning of all, the lab had found microscopic metal flecks embedded in the edges of the cut that did not match any of the car's original components, evidence of transfer from the tool that was used. I pulled the original accident report from 1990. D.I. Santos said, opening a thin folder. The investigating officer noted that the brake failure seemed suspicious, given the vehicle had just been serviced. He wrote, "Victim's mechanic confirms all systems, including brakes, were inspected and in working order 1 week prior to the accident. Cause of brake line failure is unclear, but no obvious evidence of foul play was found at the scene. The case was closed as an accidental death due to mechanical failure." Why didn't they look into it further? I asked. Different time, different technology. In 1990, they didn't have the forensic tools we have today. They looked at the scene, saw a single car crash on a dangerous road, found a faulty brake line, and moved on. We can now prove that the brake line was sabotaged. This isn't an accident. This is a murder. Within 48 hours, Richard was charged with first-degree murder while still in custody on the fraud charges. The Crown prosecutor called to tell me himself, perhaps sensing I needed to hear the words out loud to believe them. "We are seeking the maximum penalty, life in prison with no possibility of parole." But then Margaret collapsed. I was at her bedside when the doctor delivered the diagnosis, with the practiced compassion of someone who has delivered terrible news too many times. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer with metastases to the liver and lungs. 6 months at most, probably less. Treatment might buy her a few more weeks, but they would be weeks of pain. "How long have you known?" I asked her after the doctor left. 2 years. I found out right after Sophia showed up. I thought about telling you, but what was the point? You had already sacrificed enough for this family. From her hospital bed, Margaret gave a formal deposition to D.I. Santos. Her voice recorded for the trial Richard would now face. "I should have come forward 35 years ago. I was afraid he would kill me and kill Lucy too. But I can't die without telling the truth. Richard Barr murdered my sister Rebecca because she was going to expose his crimes. He told me if I ever said anything, he would make sure I lost Lucy and claim I helped him embezzle the money. I've lived in fear every single day since. But I'm dying now and he can't hurt me anymore. Lucy deserves to know her mother was a hero who tried to protect her." D.I. Santos asked one more question, referring to her notes. "Margaret, did Richard have a life insurance policy on Rebecca?" "Yes, £500,000 says it paid out 6 months after she died. He used it to start what he called his legitimate business, but it was just another scam. He always said the money came from investors, but I knew the truth. He built everything on my sister's grave." That afternoon, the prosecutor called again. "Lucy, I need to ask you something. Did your father ever mention a business partner named James Crawford?" "No. Who's that?" "Someone who went missing in 1995 after confronting Richard about embezzled funds. His body was never found. We're reopening that case too." 2 months after the wedding disaster, after Richard had been formally charged with murder and was sitting in the county jail awaiting trial, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simple. "Please read this. Sophia." I almost deleted it. The last thing I needed was more drama from Richard's manufactured family. But something made me open it. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I need to talk to you. I was lied to, just like you were. Please just give me a chance to explain. I'll understand if you say no, but I'm asking anyway. Sophia. I stared at the email for a long time, remembering the girl in the lavender dress who had slipped out the side door of the wedding venue. Part of me wanted to ignore her. She was Richard's creation, his replacement daughter, the living proof that I had never been good enough. But another part of me was curious. What did she know? What had Richard told her about me? I agreed to meet in a neutral location, a public park in central Bristol, with enough people around that I felt safe. Sophia was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench near a fountain looking small and anxious. She had lost weight since the wedding, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She stood up when she saw me twisting her hands nervously. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "I'm not sure why I did either." "I need to apologize." The words came out in a rush. "I am so, so sorry. I had no idea what Richard was doing to you. He told me you were this rich, successful daughter who wanted nothing to do with the family. He said you'd rejected him years ago, that you thought you were too good for us. That's why he never mentioned you when we first met. I believed him because I wanted a father so badly." We sat on the bench, keeping a careful distance between us. Sophia pulled out her phone and started scrolling through old messages. "I grew up not knowing my dad. My mum worked double shifts as a nurse just to support us. I always felt like there was a hole in my life, a space where a father should be. When the DNA test came back as a match to Richard, it felt like a miracle. He called me within hours, wanted to meet for coffee, said he'd made terrible mistakes and wanted to make amends." "And you believed him? Wouldn't you have?" "He cried when he saw me for the first time. Said he'd thought about me every day for 25 years. He started visiting regularly, taking me to nice restaurants, introducing me to Emily. Said he wanted to fix the past, to be the father he should have been. I thought I'd finally found what I'd been missing my whole life." I felt an unexpected pang of compassion. Sophia had been looking for the exact same thing. I had been proof that we mattered to someone, that we were worthy of love. Richard had exploited that vulnerability in both of us. "When did you realize something was wrong?" I asked. "At the wedding, when you played that recording." Emily's voice, talking about how Sophia appreciates us, like I was some grateful pet they'd adopted. And then all the rest of it. The fraud, the stolen money, the murder. I ran because I couldn't process it. I went home and started reading through all our old text messages, all our conversations, looking for signs I'd missed. She showed me her phone, pulling up texts from Richard that made my skin crawl. "When Lucy turns 40, she gets money that should have been mine. But if we can prove she's an unfit heir, a criminal mentally unstable, or if she dies before she's 40, the money goes to the next of kin. Since you're my biological daughter, you'd have a claim." "He sent me that about 6 months ago. He made it sound like you'd stolen something from him from us. He showed me bank statements that supposedly proved you were embezzling money from the family. I didn't know they were fakes. He told me you were dangerous, that you might try to turn me against him if we ever met." She kept scrolling. "Here's another one. Don't worry, darling. Once Lucy is out of the picture, legally, everything will be yours. You are my real daughter, the one I should have raised." I felt sick, reading Richard's manipulation laid so bare. He had been grooming Sophia the same way he had groomed me, only her role was to be the grateful replacement who would help him steal from the ungrateful original. "There's something I have to ask you," I said cautiously. "Did you ever verify that Richard is actually your biological father, beyond the 23, and me? Results?" Sophia looked confused. "The DNA test confirmed it. That's how we found each other." "Those consumer DNA tests show genetic relatedness, but they can be wrong or misinterpreted, especially in paternity cases. My solicitor recommended we get an official paternity test. Would you be willing to do that? Why would we need to? We already know. The understanding dawned on her face. You think he lied about that too? I think Richard has been lying about everything for 35 years. I think we should know the truth. 2 weeks later, we met again on the same park bench. This time, I was holding the envelope from the forensic lab that had analyzed our court-ordered paternity test. My hands were shaking as I opened it, but I needed to see Sophia's face when she learned the truth. Richard Barr is not the biological father of Sophia Morrison. Probability of paternity 0%. Sophia stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. That's not possible. The DNA match on 23andMe, it could have been a cousin, an uncle, some other relative. Or Richard could have manipulated his profile somehow. But this is an official test from a certified lab. He is not your father, Sophia. I called Carla. While we were sitting there putting the phone on speaker. When I told her the results, there was a long silence followed by the sound of weeping. I'm so sorry, Carla sobbed. I was seeing two men that summer, Richard and a man named Tom Shaw. Tom moved out of town before I knew I was pregnant, and I just assumed it was Richard because of the timing. When Richard embraced Sophia after the DNA test, I thought that confirmed it. Did Richard ever do an official paternity test with you? No. He said the 23andMe test was enough. I believed him because I wanted to believe my daughter had finally found her father. After we hung up, Sophia sat in silence for several minutes, tears streaming down her face, streaming. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw. He knew, didn't he? He did his own test and knew I wasn't his daughter, but he pretended anyway, because he needed you. He needed someone to replace me, someone to justify cutting me out, someone who could eventually help him steal my trust fund. You were useful to him, just like I was. He used me the same way he used you. Sophia buried her face in her hands. I thought I'd found a father. I thought I finally belonged somewhere. But it was all a lie. I was just another pawn in his game. I reached out and took her hand, surprising both of us. It wasn't all a lie. Emily might have had ulterior motives, but you developed a real relationship with her. And whatever Richard's reasons for bringing us together, we found each other. That part is real. Sophia looked up at me through her tears, vulnerable and broken, in a way I recognized because I had felt it myself 2 months ago. Can we still be sisters? She asked. Not because of him, but in spite of him. 8 months after Richard's arrest, I walked into the Bristol Crown Court with Sophia by my side. Margaret had passed away 3 months earlier, her videotaped deposition preserved for this exact moment. The courtroom was packed. The press filled the back rows. True crime bloggers sat with their laptops open. Townspeople who had known Richard for decades and couldn't believe what they were about to witness watched in stunned silence. I recognized some of them from the wedding people who had watched me expose Richard's lies in real time and were now here to see the legal consequences unfold. Richard sat at the defense table looking thinner and greyer than I had ever seen him, but his eyes still held that calculating intensity. He was being tried simultaneously for the financial crimes and for Rebecca's murder, a decision the prosecution had pushed for to expose the full pattern of his behavior. When he saw me walk in, something flickered across his face. Not remorse, but irritation, as if I were a problem that refused to be solved. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented the forged loan documents with Dr. Wolf's forensic analysis, showing the traced signatures and pressure patterns. They showed the brake line from Rebecca's car, the lab results confirming it had been deliberately cut with a pair of shears. They played Margaret's videotaped deposition from her hospital bed, her voice weak but clear. Richard Barr murdered my sister because she was going to expose his crimes. I've known for 35 years and said nothing because I was afraid. I'm not afraid anymore. Rebecca's diary entries were read aloud, her words, from beyond the grave, documenting Richard's embezzlement and her fear in the days leading up to her death. The prosecution showed the £500,000 life insurance payout Richard had received 6 months after Rebecca's death. Money, he had claimed, came from investors, but had actually been built on her grave. Richard's defense solicitor, a man named Philip Morrison, who looked exhausted by his own client, tried to argue that the financial crimes were a misunderstanding and the murder charge was circumstantial, based on an accident from decades ago. But the jurors' faces told a different story. They weren't buying it. Then the prosecution dropped its final bombshell. Richard had a pattern. 3 other business partners had suffered mysterious accidents or disappeared after discovering his fraud. James Crawford vanished in 1995 after confronting Richard about embezzled funds. His body was never found. Michael Torres died in a suspicious house fire in 2003 after threatening to report Richard to the Financial Conduct Authority. In 2008, David King's car went off a bridge due to brake failure 2 weeks after he asked too many questions about missing money. On the 3rd day of the trial, I was called to testify. I walked to the witness stand, feeling strangely calm. I put my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a woman named Andrea Chen, asked me to describe my relationship with Richard Barr. I told them everything. How Richard had blamed me for Daniel's death and made me believe I owed the family a lifetime of penance. How he had extorted money from me for 15 years, while offering nothing but demands and criticism. How he had forged my signature to steal £300,000, opened credit cards in my name, and systematically destroyed my reputation when I finally stopped paying. How he had plotted to steal the trust fund my biological mother left me, using Sophia as a bargaining chip and Emily as an accomplice. Andrea asked the question that cut to the heart of it all. Ms. Barr, in 37 years, did you ever receive anything from your father? Love, support, acknowledgement. I looked directly at Richard as I answered. No, I received demands, manipulation, and ultimately my freedom. When I realized he was never my father. He was my jailer. During cross-examination, Richard's solicitor tried to paint me as a bitter, vengeful person, suggesting I had fabricated evidence out of spite. I calmly took out my phone and played Emily's recorded confession again. Every word was admissible and incriminating. I showed bank statements from the last 15 years, proving every transfer I had ever made. The defense had no way to counter it. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The forewoman stood, and I held my breath. On the charge of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of forgery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Rebecca Morgan, we find the defendant guilty. Life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Richard shot to his feet. His solicitor tried to put a hand on his arm to calm him, but Richard shook it off. His face was purple with rage. She deserved it, he screamed. Rebecca was going to destroy everything I'd built. And Lucy, you should never have existed. You were a mistake, just like your mother. I should have. He lunged towards me, but 2 bailiffs had him before he took 3 steps. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Richard was dragged towards the door, still screaming, "You think you've won. You're just like her. You'll end up the same way." I remained completely still in the witness box, watching him disappear through the door. I felt nothing. Not fear at his threats. Not satisfaction at his conviction. just the quiet certainty that it was finally, truly over. That night, my phone rang at 11 p.m. It was someone from the prison's medical unit. "Ms. Barr, your father collapsed in his cell. He's being rushed to the hospital. He's asking for you." I didn't have to go. Sarah called just minutes after the prison notification, her voice firm and protective. "Don't do it, Lucy. He could be trying to manipulate you one last time. You don't owe him anything, not even a goodbye." But I knew I had to see him. Not for Richard, not for the therapeutic closure people always talk about, but because I needed to look him in the eye one last time, as someone who had survived him. I needed him to see that I was still standing while his world had crumbled. I needed to be the last thing he saw before whatever waited for him on the other side. Sophia offered to come with me when I called to tell her, "You shouldn't have to face him alone." "I have to do this by myself," I said. "But thank you." The hospital was sterile and quiet when I arrived just after midnight. A prison guard sat outside Richard's room looking bored, barely glancing at my ID before waving me through. Inside, machines beeped incessantly, monitoring what was left of Richard Barr's life. He looked decades older than he had in court just hours before, his skin grey and fragile tubes running from his arms, an oxygen mask on his face. But when he saw me walk in, his eyes still held that calculating glint, that manipulative intelligence that had controlled so many lives for so long. With a shaking hand, he pulled the oxygen mask down. "You came." His voice was a raw, rattling whisper. "I knew you would. You were always the obedient one." I didn't take the chair by his bedside. I stood at the foot of his bed, my arms crossed, looking down at him the way he had looked down at me for 37 years. "I didn't come because you called for me. I came because I wanted to." He tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "I did it all for this family. Your mother, Rebecca, she was going to destroy us. I had no choice. She would have sent me to prison and taken everything. I was protecting you, protecting our future." "You had a choice every single day," I cut in. "You chose to embezzle. You chose to murder. You chose cruelty over decency. You chose yourself over everyone every single time." His face hardened, a flash of the old rage glinting in his eyes. "You think you're so virtuous now, you're just like her. Stubborn and ungrateful. I gave you a home, a family, opportunities. I raised you when I could have put you in care after Rebecca died." I laughed, and the sound of it surprised both of us. It was a genuine laugh, devoid of humor, but filled with a dark recognition. "You gave me trauma debt and 37 years of shame, believing I owed you something for the crime of surviving. But thank you, Richard. Thank you for teaching me exactly what a father should never be." His breathing became ragged, the machines beeping faster. "I wanted you to be tough," he rasped. "I pushed you because the world is hard. I thought if I made you tough enough, if I taught you that nothing is free, you would be prepared. You would survive." I saw what he was doing even now, even dying. He was trying to reframe his abuse as a twisted form of love, as hard lessons meant to protect me. He wanted to die believing he had been misunderstood rather than monstrous. "No," I said, my voice cutting through his rationalization. "You pushed me because you are a coward who needed someone weaker to control. You tormented a child because she reminded you of the woman who had the courage to stand up to you. You're not tough, Richard. You're pathetic." The monitors began to shriek erratically. Nurses rushed in, checking vitals and adjusting machines. One of them looked at me and said, "You should probably step out for a minute." I ignored her. I leaned close to Richard's bed, close enough that only he could hear me, and spoke directly into his ear. "I hope you spend what little time you have left thinking about Rebecca. The woman you murdered because she had the courage. You never did the courage to stand up and tell the truth. I hope you realize that everything you tried to build on her grave fell apart the moment I stopped being afraid of you. You didn't make me strong, Richard. You made me desperate. I became strong in spite of you, not because of you. Richard's mouth moved, trying to form words, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide now, showing something that might have been fear or regret, or simply the animal panic of a man realizing death is coming, and there is no escape, no manipulation, no lie that will save him. I straightened up and walked to the door without looking back. I didn't wait in the hallway. I didn't ask the nurses for an update. I walked out of that hospital and drove back to my hotel. When my phone rang 2 hours later, a nurse informing me that Richard Barr had passed away alone with no family present, I felt nothing but relief. He was gone. Finally, completely irreversibly gone. A week later, Richard's defense solicitor called. His voice was uncomfortable, professionally distant. Ms. Barr, your father left something for you. A USB stick with specific instructions that you were to receive it only after his death. I am legally obligated to give it to you. The file is titled The Truth. I didn't listen to Richard's USB stick right away. It sat on my desk for 3 days, that little piece of plastic containing whatever final manipulation he had cooked up, whatever last-ditch attempt to control the narrative from beyond the grave. I had more pressing concerns. Emily was falling apart, and despite everything she had done, I couldn't pretend I didn't see it happening. The signs had been there for months, visible to anyone who followed her increasingly erratic social media presence. After Richard's conviction, Emily had lost everything in rapid succession. She was fired from her part-time retail job after showing up late repeatedly and having a breakdown in front of customers. Jake had not only broken off the engagement, but was now dating someone else. The Instagram photos of their relationship, like salt in a wound, Emily couldn't stop probing. She had been evicted from the house I owned after the 30-day notice expired, and had been couch surfing with friends who quickly tired of her constant victimhood. Her Facebook posts became increasingly desperate. My sister destroyed our family and sent an innocent man to prison. The truth will come out. The comments were universally unsympathetic. Your sister paid your bills while you called her a cash machine on tape. This is what happens, girl. Your dad literally murdered someone. Get help. To buy one, Emily's friends stopped responding to her posts, stopped inviting her out, stopped answering her calls. She tried reaching out to true crime podcasters, convinced they would want to hear the real story of how Richard Barr was framed by his vengeful daughter. They all declined. Even people looking for sensational content realized Emily had no credibility, no evidence, nothing but the desperate denials of someone who couldn't accept reality. I learned later from a hospital social worker that Emily had stopped showering, was sleeping 16 hours a day, and had lost 20 pounds. She became obsessed with clearing my father's name, spending hours writing letters to journalists and lawyers that went unanswered. She was living alone in a borrowed studio flat when she wrote the note. I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. The bottle of sleeping pills she swallowed should have been enough, but her temporary flatmate came home early from work and found her unconscious on the bathroom floor. The 999 call saved her life. The hospital called me at 2 a.m. because I was still listed as Emily's emergency contact. I drove to Bristol in a fog of conflicting emotions. Anger at being dragged back into her chaos, guilt. That part of me had been expecting this call, and something else I didn't want to name, but that felt uncomfortably like concern. Emily was in a private room with beeping monitors, an IV in her arm, pumping fluids, and whatever else they'd given her after pumping her stomach. She looked small in the hospital bed, vulnerable in a way that reminded me of when she was a child before Richard had turned her into his accomplice. When she woke up and saw me sitting in the chair by her bed, her first reaction wasn't gratitude. It was rage. "Why are you here?" She spat, her voice raw. You've won, Lucy. You destroyed everything. Our family dad's reputation my entire life. You took everything from me. I let her finish, watching her spiral until she was crying so hard she couldn't speak. Then I said very quietly, Emily, I didn't destroy anything. Dad destroyed everything 35 years ago when he murdered Rebecca. You destroyed your own life when you chose to participate in it. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, I continued. You chose to record our conversation to help Dad frame me. You chose to cut me out of your wedding and still expect my money. You chose to call me a cash machine and laugh about it with Sophia. Those were your choices, Emily. She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. I didn't know what else to do, she choked out. I was never as smart or successful as you. Dad loved you more even when he was hurting you, and I was invisible unless I went along with him. Being useful to him was the only way I mattered. Those words hit me harder than I expected, because I heard the truth in them. Emily hadn't been the favoured child. She had been the collaborator valued only for her willingness to participate in Richard's schemes. She had been damaged by him too, just in a different way. But acknowledging that didn't erase what she had done or excuse her choices. I'm not going to let you die, Emily, I said. But I'm not going to save you either. You are going to save yourself. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. How? I'm not going to press charges for your involvement in the recording incident, and I will pay for 1 month of inpatient treatment at a mental health facility so you can get stable. After that, if you ever want any kind of relationship with me, you will work not for me, but with me. I'm starting a foundation for women escaping financial abuse. You will volunteer there for 2 years, helping women whose lives look like what mine could have been. You will listen to their stories, and maybe you will finally understand what you were a part of. If you do that, really do it, we can talk about being sisters again. But not before. I am done enabling you. Emily's face twisted in a mixture of horror and disbelief. You're making me work with those people. Those people are me, Emily. I said, my voice hard as steel. Every woman who walks through the doors of that foundation is someone whose family has used them, drained them and discarded them. That's what I was to you and Dad. And if you can't see that, then we have nothing left to say to each other. The room was silent, except for the beeping monitors. Emily looked at me, then down at her hands, then back at me. I could see her calculating, trying to find a loophole, a way to manipulate this so she could control it. But there was no loophole. There was only a choice: face what she had done and try to change or keep sinking until there was nothing left. Okay, she whispered finally. I'll do it. I stood to leave, pausing at the door. The place is called Willow Grove. I've already arranged it. They're expecting you tomorrow. A car will pick you up at 10 a.m. I walked out of Emily's room, not knowing if she would follow through. Not knowing if 2 years of service would actually change her, or if she would just count the days so she could claim an unearned redemption. But I had given her something Richard never gave either of us: a real choice and a real chance to change. 2 weeks after Emily checked into Willow Grove, Richard's solicitor called to schedule the reading of his will. I sat in Philip Morrison's office with Sophia by my side, while Emily appeared on a laptop screen via video call from the facility. She looked better than she had in the hospital cleaner, more alert, though her eyes still had that hollow, broken look of someone trying to piece their identity back together from fragments. Philip looked deeply uncomfortable as he opened the file. I want to start by saying I advised Mr. Barr against this particular arrangement, he began. But he was insistent. The estate, after legal fees, settlements and debts, are paid amounts to approximately £75,000. He paused, looking at each of us in turn. Mr. Barr left everything to Lucy Barr, nothing to Emily Barr, nothing to Sophia Morrison. Emily made a small hurt sound from the laptop speakers. Sophia just nodded slowly as if she had expected it. Philip pulled a handwritten letter on yellow legal paper from the file. And there is also this addressed to you, Lucy. Would you like me to read it? Or would you prefer to read it yourself? Read it, I said. I wanted witnesses for whatever manipulation Richard had engineered from beyond the grave. Philip cleared his throat and read. Lucy, you were always the strong one, even when I tried to break you. You deserve better than me. This is my apology. I hope you can use this money to build something good. You won in spite of me, and I know now that makes you far more successful than I ever was. Richard. The room was silent. Then I reached across the desk, took the letter from Philip's hands, and tore it in half. Then Shadihif again and again, until there was nothing but yellow confetti scattered across his mahogany desk. That is not an apology, I said. That is one final manipulation. If I keep the money he gets to pretend he redeemed himself. If I split it with Emily and Sophia, he has orchestrated one last piece of control over our relationship. And if I refuse it entirely, he probably expected me to look ungrateful or spiteful. Even dead, he's still trying to play me. What do you want to do? Philip asked cautiously. I'm refusing the inheritance. Every penny is to be donated to the Real Family Foundation, a non-profit Sophia and I are setting up to help women over 40 escape financial abuse from their family members. The foundation will offer legal aid, financial literacy education, emergency housing and support groups. Richard spent his entire life taking from people. This money will finally do some good. Philip made a note, then asked, and what about his personal effects? There are boxes of papers, photos, his wedding ring, personal items. What would you like done with them? Burn it, I said without hesitation. All of it. I don't want his memory preserved in any way. Sophia nodded in agreement. On the laptop screen, Emily finally spoke, her voice small and defeated. He really didn't love any of us, did he? I looked at her pixelated face. My sister, who had spent 29 years trying to earn the affection of a man who had none to give. No, Emily, he didn't. Richard wasn't capable of love, only of possession and control. But that doesn't mean we can't love each other. That's what you're learning at Willow Grove, isn't it? That your worth doesn't come from being useful to someone else. Emily's eyes filled with tears. It's hard. They keep asking me who I am without him, and I don't know the answer. That's okay, I said, surprising myself with the softness in my voice. You have time to figure it out. After we left Philip's office, I drove Sophia back to her flat. We had been spending more time together lately, building something that felt like a real chosen family instead of an imposed one based on mutual respect instead of obligation or blood. Thank you for not taking his money, Sophia said as I pulled up to her building. I know that probably sounds strange, but the thought of him still having power over us through an inheritance made me sick. Me too. This way at least something good comes from his existence. That evening, Philip called again. There's one more thing. An envelope from Margaret Barr, prepared before her death, left in my care, with instructions to give it to you after Richard's estate was settled. I drove back to his office and picked up a cream-coloured envelope with my name in Margaret's shaky script. Inside was a letter and a small brass key. The letter read, Lucy, I was never the mother you deserved, but I want you to know that Rebecca loved you more than life itself. I kept something for you all these years. Her diaries, the real ones where she wrote about her dreams for you. She wanted you to be free, to be brave, to be nothing like Richard. You became everything she hoped for. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better, but I protected this. The key opens safe deposit box 847 at First National Bank downtown. Love, Margaret. Mum. The next morning I went to the bank with trembling hands. The safe deposit box was small. Inside I found 3 leather-bound notebooks tied with a faded ribbon, a stack of photos and a passbook for a savings account I never knew existed. The diaries were Rebecca's, different from the ones James Shaw had shown me. These were personal, intimate, filled with hopes and dreams instead of evidence of crimes. An entry from when she was 8 months pregnant read, "I want Lucy to grow up knowing she is loved for who she is, not for what she can provide. I want her to be brave enough to walk away from anything that makes her smaller. I want her to know that family is supposed to be safety, not a prison." The photos showed Rebecca pregnant and radiant, Rebecca holding me as a newborn, tears of joy on her face. Rebecca singing to me in a rocking chair. In every single image, the love was unmistakable, radiating from her expression like light. The savings passbook showed monthly deposits made from 1988 to 1990, totaling £50,000 money. Rebecca had been secretly saving to leave Richard. Money that had been frozen when she died and forgotten in the banking system for 35 years. Now, legally, it was mine as her heir. That night, sitting in my hotel room with Rebecca's diaries spread across the bed, I cried for the first time in months, not from grief or anger or even relief, but from a sorrow for the mother I never got to know, and a gratitude that her love had survived for 35 years, preserved by a woman who had been too afraid to speak, but brave enough to remember. 3 months after Richard's death, Sophia showed up unannounced at my London flat, carrying a parcel wrapped in brown paper. I had given her a key weeks earlier, a gesture that had made her cry because it signified trust, something neither of us had experienced much of in our lives. "I found something at my mum's house," she said, using the name she had reverted to for Carla after learning Richard wasn't her father. "I thought you should have it." She unwrapped the parcel carefully, revealing a framed photograph that looked decades old. 2 young women teenagers really had their arms around each other, laughing at something just out of the camera's view. One had my eyes, the other had Margaret's gentle smile. "Your mother and your aunt," Sophia said softly. "Rebecca and Margaret. Mum found it in our attic. Apparently Margaret gave it to her years ago for safekeeping. They looked happy before Richard came into their lives." I took the photo with a trembling hand, staring at Rebecca's face, seeing my own reflection in her features more clearly than I ever had in Margaret's. These 2 sisters had once loved each other before Richard turned that love into blackmail and fear. "Thank you," I whispered. Sophia sat on my sofa, fidgeting with her hands in a way I had come to recognize as her being nervous. "Lucy, I need to say something, and I don't know if I have the right to, but I'm going to say it anyway." "Okay. I know I'm not Richard's daughter. I know I have no biological connection to you. We're not related by blood. I'm just some random woman whose mother dated a monster 30 years ago. But these last few months, working on the foundation together, planning the bench in Rebecca's memory, going through all this trauma side by side, I feel closer to you than I ever did to anyone Richard introduced me to. You've been more of a sister to me in 6 months than Emily was in 20 years. She looked at me, vulnerable and hopeful. "I know I have no right to ask this, but can we still be sisters? Not because of him, not because of some DNA test that turned out to be a lie, but because we choose to be, because we want to be family." I sat down next to her and took her hand. "Sophia, you are the only good thing that came out of this entire nightmare. Yes, we are sisters by choice, and that makes it more real than any blood tie ever could." She hugged me then, and we both cried. But it was the good kind of crying, the kind that comes from relief and joy, not from pain. 2 weeks later, we officially launched the Real Family Foundation. The name had been Sophia's idea, a deliberate reclaiming of the phrase Richard had used against me. We rented a small office space in Bristol, hired a part-time social worker, and put the word out through domestic violence networks and seniors' centres that we were taking new clients. Our first client was a woman named Patricia Chen, 62, who came to us through a referral from Adult Protective Services. She sat in our intake room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, shame written in every line of her face. "My son has been taking my pension checks for 3 years," she said quietly. "He says he's managing my money because I'm too old to handle it myself, but I never see any of it. When I asked for some to buy food last month, he threatened to put me in a care home." Sophia and I exchanged a look. We had heard versions of this story in our research, but hearing it from a real person in real time made it hit so much harder. We connected Patricia with one of our volunteer solicitors, helped her file a police report, and arranged for emergency housing in an independent living facility that would only accept payment from Patricia herself. Within 2 months, Patricia's son was charged with elder financial abuse, and she had regained control of her accounts. The thank you card arrived on a Tuesday, Patricia's handwriting shaky but determined. For 3 years, I thought I was supposed to sacrifice everything for my son. My friends said that's what good mothers do, help their children, no matter what. You taught me that love doesn't have to be self-destructive. You saved my life and gave me permission to save myself. Thank you. Sophia and I read it together in our little office, and we both started to cry. "We're turning his poison into medicine," Sophia said. "It's exactly what Rebecca would have wanted," I replied. 6 months after the foundation opened, Emily finished her intensive treatment at Willow Grove and began her 2-year volunteer commitment at our intake centre. I was skeptical that she would actually show up, but she did every Tuesday and Thursday, looking uncomfortable in professional clothes that didn't quite fit her personality yet. She didn't transform overnight. There were still moments where her old entitlement would peek through, where she'd make a comment about a client that revealed she didn't fully grasp that she had been one of the abusers, not the abused. But there were flashes of growth. One Thursday afternoon, a woman came in because her daughter was siphoning money from her pension account. Emily did the initial interview. I watched through the office window as she listened to the woman's story. The woman said something that made Emily's face go pale. After the client left, Emily came to find me. "I recognized myself in that daughter's excuses," she said in a whisper. "The sense of entitlement, the justification, the way she made it sound like her mother owed her the money. That was me. That's what I did to you." She started to cry, and I let her, not rushing to comfort or chastise her. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but clear. "I am so sorry, Lucy. I am so, so sorry." I didn't forgive her immediately. That's not how healing works. You don't just say the words and make the past disappear. But I nodded. "Thank you for saying that. Keep doing the work. Keep listening. That's how you make it right." It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was a start. Emily still had a year and a half of her service left, and the road to real redemption was long and uncertain. But for the first time, she was walking it instead of running from it. That night, I got an email from a publisher in New York. "Ms. Barr, we have been following your story in the media, and we would like to discuss a book project. Not a true crime book, but a guide for other women experiencing financial abuse from their family. Would you be interested in writing it?" I stared at the email for 3 days before I replied. Writing the book would mean reliving all of it, every moment of manipulation, every time I had prioritized Richard's approval over my own well-being. Every pound I had sent while eating instant noodles in my tiny flat. But it also meant the possibility that someone else would read it and recognize themselves before they had wasted 37 years. I called Sophia. Do you want to write this with me? What would I write about? I only knew Richard for 2 years. Exactly. You can write from the perspective of someone who was manipulated into the system without understanding what was happening. I'll write from the victim's perspective. Together, we can show how these abusers work, how they pit people against each other, how they create elaborate justifications, how they make everyone feel like they're the problem instead of him. We spent 6 months writing Real Family Breaking Free from Financial Abuse. I wrote late into the night, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the darkness. Tears sometimes falling onto the keyboard as I documented the years after Daniel's death. The £5,000 monthly transfers, the forged loan, the wedding that cut me out. On her lunch breaks at the foundation, Sophia wrote explaining how Richard had seemed like a dream come true, how he had shown her faked documents that proved I was the villain, how she had genuinely believed she was building a relationship with her father. The practical parts were easier. I knew this content from helping clients at the foundation. How to recognize financial abuse. Do you feel guilty for setting boundaries around money? Does your family member get angry when you say no? Are you expected to share your income, but given no transparency about how it's spent? How to document evidence. Save every text, every email, every bank statement. How to ask for help. Contact Adult Protective Services. Consult a solicitor who specializes in elder abuse. Reach out to organizations like ours. We dedicated the book to Rebecca, who fought for freedom, to Margaret, who kept the truth alive, and to every woman who has been told that family duty means self-destruction. 3 weeks before the publication date, Emily asked me to meet for coffee. It had been a year since she started at the foundation, and she seemed different, more solid somehow, like she had finally found her footing. Her clothes were professional but understated, and she had cut her hair into a practical style that suited her better than the perfect Instagram waves she used to have. I want to do something, she said, stirring her coffee nervously. I want to write a public apology and publish it in the Bristol Herald, the same paper that ran Dad's article about you. I was immediately skeptical. Why public? If you want to apologize to me, you can do it privately. Because I participated in the public destruction of your reputation. Dad paid for that article, and I knew it. I helped build the narrative that you were the ungrateful daughter. I need to publicly own what I did, just like you publicly exposed what he did. Emily, you don't have to. Yes, I do. For me, not just for you. I need to stop hiding behind excuses like, I didn't know what I was doing, or my dad manipulated me. I knew enough. I chose to participate, and I need to say that out loud for everyone to hear. The apology ran as a full-page ad paid for by Emily, with money from her job as an administrative assistant, her first real job ever. I didn't know she was publishing it until the morning it ran. A client brought a copy into the foundation office, asking if this was my sister. My name is Emily Barr, it read. 2 years ago, I participated in the financial and emotional abuse of my sister Lucy. I helped my father isolate her, use her, and then discard her when she finally set a boundary. I recorded a private conversation in an attempt to gather evidence to use against her. I called her a cash machine. I treated her like she owed us her life simply because we were related by blood. I was wrong. Lucy didn't destroy our family. Our father did when he murdered her mother 35 years ago. Lucy saved my life, not by enabling me or forgiving me easily, but by forcing me to face what I had become and giving me a chance to change. If you have ever hurt someone in the name of family, I'm telling you from experience, stop now. Family isn't about obligation or money. It's about love, respect, and the freedom to choose. I'm still learning what that means. I'm so sorry, Lucy. I sat in my office staring at the newspaper. Sophia came and stood behind me, reading over my shoulder. That took courage, she said quietly. Yes, I agreed. It really did. Real Family was published on a Tuesday in March, and by Friday it had sold out at 3 major bookshop chains. The publisher rushed a second printing. By the end of the month, we hit number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list. We stayed there for 12 weeks. Sophia and I went on a book tour that felt less like marketing and more like missionary work. In libraries and community centers and church basements, women lined up to tell us their stories. A 65-year-old woman in Ohio whose daughter had stolen her identity and opened 17 credit cards. A 58-year-old in Michigan whose son had convinced her to sign over the deed to her house and then evicted her. A 72-year-old in Georgia whose entire family had disowned her because she finally said no to funding her grandson's 4th failed business venture. One woman came up to me after an event in Denver, tears streaming down her face. I've been sending my son £3,000 a month for 10 years. He's 35. He tells me I owe him because I worked too much when he was a kid, because I divorced his father, because I didn't pay for the private university he wanted. After reading your book, I'm stopping. I didn't know I was allowed to choose myself. Thank you for giving me permission. The Foundation's helpline listed in the book's resources section was overwhelmed with calls. We had to hire 3 more staff members just to handle the volume. Women called from all over the country, some crying, some angry, all of them. Some version of me from 2 years ago, trapped in a system that told them love meant sacrifice and boundaries meant selfishness. I realized my story wasn't unique at all. It was an epidemic. Financial abuse by family was happening in millions of homes, and no one talked about it because we are taught that family is sacred, that blood is thicker than water, that we owe a debt of gratitude to the people who raised us. Shame kept people silent, and silence kept them trapped. Bringing it into the light was the only way to stop it. Late at night, working on foundation paperwork in my London flat, I would sometimes look at the framed photo of Rebecca and Margaret, those 2 laughing sisters before Richard had destroyed them in different ways. I wished Rebecca could see this. How her courage to document the truth to save evidence, even when she was terrified, had ended up freeing not just me, but thousands of other women. Her death wasn't for nothing. Her fight mattered. 3 months after the book's release, my phone rang with a New York area code. The producer from Good Morning Britain was direct and enthusiastic. Ms. Barr, we've been following your story and the incredible success of the book. We'd like to have you and Sophia on the show to share your story with a national audience. Are you ready to tell millions of women that they do not owe their families their own destruction? I looked at Sophia, who was sitting on my sofa, reviewing grant applications for the foundation. GMB, I mouthed. She looked up, her eyes wide. Are you ready for that? I thought of Rebecca, of Margaret, of all the women who had stood in line at our book events, crying because someone had finally said out loud what they had been living in silence. Yes, I said. I'm ready. We flew to London on a Tuesday, Sophia and I, sitting together on the train, going over the talking points our publicist had prepared. But I knew I wouldn't need them. After 2 years of telling the story at book events and foundation meetings, the words came naturally. They weren't rehearsed. They were just true. The Good Morning Britain studio was smaller than it looked on television, but the energy was electric. Susanna Reid greeted us in the green room, and her presence was immediately calming. I want you to know, she said, looking at me directly, that we're not treating this like entertainment. This is important. Women need to hear this. When I walked out onto that stage and sat opposite Susanna under the bright lights, I felt a remarkable calm. She didn't start with small talk. She went straight to the heart of it. Lucy, you paid your family £5,000 a month for 15 years. You bought them a house, you funded your sister's entire lifestyle, and then they banned you from her wedding, saying it was for real family only. How did you survive finding out that your father had also murdered your biological mother? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question, and answered with hard-won clarity. I survived by realizing that the family I was mourning had never actually existed. I was mourning a fantasy, the idea that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, proved my worth enough, I would finally be loved. But you can't earn love from people who see you as an asset, not a person. The day I stopped paying wasn't the day I lost my family, it was the day I stopped losing myself. Susanna nodded, her eyes full of understanding. Your book has struck a chord with millions of women. Why do you think that is? Because financial abuse by family is an epidemic, but no one talks about it. We're taught, Ben, that family is sacred, that blood is everything, that we owe a debt of gratitude to the people who raised us. Shame keeps people silent, and silence keeps them trapped. I wanted to break that silence. The interview lasted 12 minutes, but it felt like both an eternity and an instant. Susanna asked about Rebecca, about Margaret's complicity and cowardice, about the moment I realized Richard would never change. When it was over, I thought we were done, but Susanna smiled and said, "We have a surprise for you." Sophia came out on stage first, and then Emily, who I hadn't known would be there. The three of us sat together on that sofa, an unlikely trio, brought together by trauma and slowly by choice. Susanna turned to Emily with a directness I appreciated. Emily, you participated in this abuse. You recorded your sister in an attempt to gather evidence against her. You called her a cash machine. Why should anyone watching believe you've changed? Emily didn't hesitate or make excuses. They shouldn't believe me just based on words. They should watch my actions. I've spent the last 18 months working with women I used to think I was better than, women whose families used them the way I used Lucy. And I've learned that I was just like the people who hurt them. I was an enabler who justified it by saying family comes first. I'm trying to become a giver now. It's all I can do. I can't undo the past, but I can try to be better going forward. It wasn't perfect, and I could see the moments where Emily still didn't fully grasp the extent of what she'd done, but it was honest. That counted for something. Susanna turned to Sophia. You were used as a pawn to replace Lucy, recruited into this family based on a lie. How did you come to terms with that? It made me realize that Richard didn't love me either, Sophia said, her voice steady. He loved what I represented, control over another person. He loved being able to use me to hurt Lucy, to justify pushing her out. Lucy taught me that real family isn't about what you can get from someone. It's about what you can build together. And we're building something now that's actually real. For the final segment, Susanna asked me the question that mattered most. Lucy, what do you want the millions of women watching this to take away? I looked directly into the camera, thinking of all the women I had met on the book tour, of all the calls to our foundation's helpline, of all the people suffering in silence because they think family duty means self-destruction. If you are in a relationship with a parent, a child, a sibling, anyone where you have to destroy yourself to prove your love that is not family, that is abuse. You do not owe anyone your mental health, your financial security, or your self-worth. The people who truly love you will not ask you to give those things up. And if walking away means being alone, I promise you, being alone is better than being used. You deserve a family that chooses you, not one that consumes you. The studio audience erupted in applause. I saw women in the front row crying, and I knew they understood, because they had lived it too. After the show, my phone became unusable from the flood of messages, text after text from women I had never met. You gave me the courage to leave. I filed for divorce this morning. I cut off my abusive son. I'm calling a solicitor about my mother. Thank you for saying it's okay to choose myself. The foundation's website crashed from the traffic, and by the end of the day, we had over 3,000 new requests for services. That night, I sat in my hotel room reading messages until my eyes burned and I thought of Rebecca. Her death had seemed so senseless for so long. A young mother murdered to cover up financial crimes, silenced before she could tell her truth. But that wasn't the end of her story. Her courage to document what was happening, to hide evidence, to write in her diary, even when she was terrified, had set off a chain of events that was now saving thousands of women from similar fates. Rebecca's death wasn't in vain. It was the beginning of something that would outlive us all. The next night, Sophia and I rented a car and drove to the Cornish coast, to Porthcurno, where it had all begun 30 years ago. The same stretch of coast where Daniel had drowned, saving me, where Richard had decided that day that I would spend the rest of my life paying penance for surviving. The same ocean that now held Margaret's ashes and Richard's, though we had scattered them in different places. Margaret's with ceremony and love, Richard's with nothing but finality. We had one last ritual to perform. We stood on the rocky Cornish beach at sunset. 3 women brought together by a dead man's manipulation, who had chosen to stay together in spite of it. The cold wind off the Atlantic whipped our hair as we held 2 simple containers, one with Margaret's ashes, the other with Richard's. I spoke first, holding Margaret's container in both hands. Margaret, you weren't perfect. You let fear rule you for 35 years. You watched me get hurt and said nothing because you were afraid of losing me. But your silence almost destroyed me anyway. And yet you kept Rebecca's truth alive. You saved the evidence, and in the end you chose to tell it, even knowing it would cost you everything. I forgive you. I hope you found peace with Rebecca, wherever you both are now. I opened the container and scattered her ashes into the wind. They caught the light for a moment, golden in the sunset, before drifting out over the water where the waves would take them. I watched them go and felt something release in my chest. Not quite grief, not quite relief, but something softer. Acceptance, maybe. Understanding. Then I took Richard's container. It felt heavier. Or maybe that was just my imagination. Sophia and Emily stood on either side of me, and we all looked at each other. I don't want to say anything good about him, Emily said quietly. I can't. I tried to find something worth honoring, and there's nothing. Me neither, Sophia agreed. He used everyone he ever met. He killed anyone who got in his way. I don't think he deserves any words at all. I nodded. Then we'll give him nothing. We'll just let him go. I opened Richard's container and tipped his ashes straight into the ocean. No ceremony, no words, no dignity of a moment of silence. We watched the waves take him, pulling the grey dust out to sea, where it would disperse and disappear. The silence wasn't bitter or angry. It was freeing. He was gone. Finally, completely, powerlessly gone. He couldn't hurt anyone anymore. We stood there together as the sun finished its descent. 3 women who were not related by blood, but bound by something stronger. Survival choice and a shared understanding of what it means to rebuild yourself from the ruins someone else created. 6 months later, I was living in the little seaside cottage in Cornwall that I had rented during my first escape. I'd ended up buying it and making it my own, with a garden where I grew tomatoes and sunflowers, with bookshelves filled with novels I actually had time to read, with a porch where I drank my coffee and watched the ocean without feeling guilty for not being productive. Ruth from the cafe had become a sort of surrogate mother, coming for dinner once a week and teaching me her grandmother's recipes. She never asked for anything, never expected me to be useful or profitable, or even particularly interesting. She just enjoyed my company, and I was learning that was enough. I worked part-time as a financial consultant, specializing in helping women rebuild their credit after escaping financial abuse. The rest of my time was dedicated to the Real Family Foundation, which now had 5 full-time staff members and had helped over 300 women escape situations just like mine. Every success story felt like undoing a small piece of what Richard had done, like turning his poison into something that could heal. I was also dating someone which still surprises me when I think about it. His name was Daniel. Yes, I had noticed the name. And yes, we had talked about what it meant to me. He was a librarian with kind eyes and a quiet way of listening that made me feel heard instead of analyzed. He paid his own bills. He never asked me for money. When I offered to split the bill on dates, he wasn't offended or threatened or weird about it. He just said, "Okay," and meant it. It was strange being in a relationship where I didn't have to be useful, just present, where my value wasn't measured by what I could provide, but by who I was. I was still learning how to accept love without earning it, still catching myself trying to prove I was worth keeping around. But Daniel was patient, and slowly I was learning. On the second anniversary of Richard's arrest, a letter arrived with a Bristol postmark and Emily's handwriting. I opened it carefully, not knowing what to expect. "Lucy, I don't expect you to ever fully forgive me, and I don't expect us to be close. But I wanted you to know that I paid my own rent this month, in full on time with money I earned. I didn't borrow. I didn't beg. I didn't manipulate anyone into helping me. I earned it. I'm also enrolled at Bristol Community College studying social work. For the first time in my life, I'm proud of myself. Not for what someone gave me, but for what I built. You taught me that. Thank you. I hope one day I can be half the person you are. Love, Emily." I sat on my porch and read the letter 3 times and cried, not from sadness, but from hope. Could Emily actually make it? Could she actually become a real person? Sophia was thriving too. She had reconnected with Tom Shaw, the man who turned out to be her biological father, and they were building a genuine relationship based on truth, not the fantasy Richard had sold her. She was engaged and planning a small wedding, for which she had asked me to be her maid of honor, not as a replacement for anyone, but as her sister of the heart. The foundation announced its biggest initiative, yet the Rebecca Morgan Freedom Fund, a scholarship program for women over 50, returning to education after leaving abusive families. At the launch event, I stood in front of a room full of survivors and supporters, and I felt Rebecca's presence like a warmth at my back. We had taken her tragedy and turned it into liberation for hundreds of women. Her death was not in vain. Her courage had created a legacy. That night I drove back to the beach with Sophia, Ruth, and 3 women from the foundation who had become my friends. We stood at the water's edge, watching the sunset, and I thought about how the ocean now held Rebecca, Margaret, and even Richard. All of them dissolved into the water that moved with the tides, not haunting me, just existing in the past where they belonged. I turned to the women beside me, Sophia, who had become the sister I chose, and Ruth, who had shown me what motherly love looked like, and the survivors who had become my community, and I smiled. For the first time in my life, I didn't owe anyone anything. And for the first time, I wasn't alone. This was my real family built not on blood or obligation, but on choice and healing and the courage to walk away from what was killing me and towards what would finally let me live. And that's where Lucy's story ends, or maybe that's where it truly begins. She walked away from a family that saw her as a bank account, exposed the man who murdered her mother, and built something real from the ashes of everything she lost. She proved that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choice respect and the courage to say enough is enough. If Lucy's story resonated with you, if you've ever felt trapped by family duty or drained by the people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to know you are not alone. Thousands of women just like Lucy are finding the strength to choose themselves. And if her story gave you even a moment of clarity or courage, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We share stories like this every week. Stories of real people who faced impossible situations and found a way through. Your subscription helps us reach more people who need to hear these messages. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where family obligations felt like a prison? Have you had to set boundaries with people who thought they owned you? Or maybe you know someone who is going through what Lucy went through? Let me know in the comments below. Share your story if you feel comfortable. Sometimes just knowing that other people have survived similar situations can be the lifeline someone needs. And if Lucy's courage inspired you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Let's build a community where choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And remember, you do not owe anyone your own destruction. Until next time.